The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of Spaced Out Radio or Spaced Out Radio Limited is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised.
BUMBLEFOOT. BUMBLEFOOT.
Are you experienced?
Stop right there!
From high atop the mountains of British Columbia to you, listening around the world, this is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
They let us play with all our toys. They let us think that we're big boys. They let us make the louder noise, but we ain't rule the world. They let us think we're Superman.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, on iTunes and TuneIn. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, or on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show.
I try to act so cool, but you know I'm just a fool for you. I will stop till I reach the top just to be there with you.
Dave, oh Dave, are you playing with Bigfoot and aliens again?
Dad, you gotta stop haunting the ghost. It's scaring them.
All right, seriously, put down the pointy sticks.
Oh, the deeper I fall.
Okay! Game on! Game on! Game on!
The password is...
Alright.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio. Mr. Bumblefoot, Dave is ready for liftoff.
I try to act so cool, but you know I'm just a fool for you.
Seriously, Dave? Really? Aren't you a little old for a tinfoil hat?
Hello, Toby. Bye-bye. Love you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, just please take your seat about there. We're at the edge. It's time for takeoff. Start. 2, 1. Boost ignition and liftoff.
I'm such a lucky guy, 'cause after all this time, it's like the deeper I go, the deeper I fall. The deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Good evening and welcome to Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott, and it's great to have you along for the ride on this Tuesday, November 21st, Wednesday, November 22nd. If you're on the East Coast or across the pond, hope you had a great day and night. We are live right here in the Great White North on top of the snowy mountains of central British Columbia as we are here for you 7 days a week. We welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Newnan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. We are also live on spacedoutradio.com, Spreaker, KTLK, The Fringe.fm, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, and if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Like our music, get your horns up for Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Art of Anarchy and Sons of Apollo. Bumblefoot is the official sound of this show. Now, we're all over social media, so give us a follow on Twitter, at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show on Instagram. You can follow me at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our brand new YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio. It is no longer Spaced Out Radio Show, so you got to sign in to Spaced Out Radio to get all of our archives now. We're moving them on over. You can also listen to us on iHeartRadio in the United States, TalkStream Live, tune us in on TuneIn, download and subscribe to our shows on iTunes, and of course our website is spacedoutradio.com. Now, we have two chats for you to take part in, so if you want to get your questions in, you got to get into one of these two chat rooms. You either have to go in and sign in on Spreaker, or you go into Facebook, sign up for the SOR Space Travelers group. We'll let you on in, and you can chat away there as well. Or if you're on Twitter, use the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. I will get to your questions and comments and snark in there as well. Now, if you head to our website for $5 a month, you can become a member of the SOR Space Travelers Club, and you can also shop at our Spaced Out Radio store. We have the Encounter Online, our great news section dealing with everything paranormal, strange, and odd. Check out my latest blog there as well. And if you've had an experience you can't explain, just fill out an SOR Sightlines report. We'll get someone to investigate it for you. We also have great videos from Leslie Mitchell Clark's Contact TV and Tim Doyle's UFO Seekers. Now, the field of ufology is ever expanding as every day people start looking up into the skies to see what's happening above them. Now, that's far and few between, considering we're mostly looking down into our cell phones. Sometimes it's just a keen interest in the topics. Other times, it's the experiences one has that forces them to investigate their own happenings. For tonight's guests, it's an interest of learning what this field of UFOs is all about. Roz and Dale Mugford are investigative journalists creating documentaries about the UFO experience. Talking to people such as Stanton Friedman, Richard Dolan, and more, the married UFO nuts are looking to bring UFO documentaries into a more basic human level, so that way even some of the biggest skeptics will want to believe. Their series is called the Encounter Series, which we will learn more about tonight. Roz and Dale Mugford, thank you so much for being on Spaced Out Radio. Always good to invite a couple of Canadians in to SOR headquarters here. How are you?
We're good, Dave. Thanks for having us.
Oh, not a problem. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's absolutely great to have you. You know, the one thing I like about you guys, and Roz, I'm going to focus on you because you and I talked for quite a bit before Dale got home today so we could chat. But you and I actually probably have a bunch of mutual friends as you were working in Vancouver's media at the same time I was. We didn't even meet. We didn't know each other. You were more newsy and all that and television. I was more sportsy and radio. So it's kind of funny how it works sometimes like that.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah, I was working in Vancouver in and around 2006, 2007, producing a television show out there, actually. It was called Off Center Television, and it was broadcast on KBOS TV. Off Center Television, not surprising, thinking back now. But yeah, and it was kind of like a Saturday Night Live sketch comedy kind of arts and entertainment show for the Vancouver area. And I did that for about 2 years before I moved out to Toronto. So yeah, we were there at the same time, same place. That's just, like I said, today we're on the air at the same time, which is hilarious.
Well, Well, it really is. And the fact is, it's too bad we didn't run into each other, but you wouldn't have seen me outside of either General Motors Place, which is now Rogers Centre, where the Canucks play, or BC Place, where the Lions play. So that's usually where I was hanging out.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Hey, yeah, that's awesome. I was doing some work at the CBC too at the time, working on the debaters there. So I was doing some radio too. So we were kind of in the same industry at the same time as well.
It is fascinating. So how did you guys get into the field of ufology? Dale, let's start with you.
I think my interest kind of developed actually in my mid-20s. I had actually a near-death experience myself. I was in a kind of a crazy accident and was quite injured, and had a kind of a near-death experience. I didn't know that's what it was at the time. It took many years before I could kind of process it, and then I understood through some research what had happened. So that kind of really cracked open for me my awareness that things aren't, as cut and dry as many of us are raised to believe that they are, and kind of get open towards, information that was really on outside the mainstream. And more recently, in the last few years, Roz and I really kind of took to researching UFOs. I mean, I used to watch, Unsolved Mysteries, and I was always, into those kinds of shows when I was younger. But, we really kind of dove in a few years ago and did a ton of research into the field, and that really kind of fueled my interest in the subject.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, yeah, and for me, it was, like I had mentioned earlier today, I've always been interested in the paranormal ever since I was a kid. Like I had this old, Reader's Digest book that was just totally tattered and torn that I read cover to cover, and the UFOs was a big part of kind of that paranormal world. And, also was interested in, Nancy Drew and Unsolved Mysteries and, that type of thing. And then, had a few friends growing up who had encounters of their own, like, strange kind of incidences with lights in the sky, missing time, things like that. People who I really loved and trusted and admired and were telling me that they'd had these experiences. So I've always just been really, intrigued and interested in the field of ufology, but I kind of left it behind when I was a kid. For me, it was kind of one of those things that I dove into when I was a kid, and I spent a lot of time reading and researching and, cover to cover that old book that I gave my son. My son has now. But kind of put it away. It was one of those things where, I don't know why. I guess I just kind of thought maybe it was childish things or whatever, or just got into career and stopped focusing on it. And then, more recently, like Dale had mentioned, there was, we started kind of getting into it about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and just diving into the new research that's been done in the field. And we're just kind of really, pleasantly surprised by the, plethora of new information that's come out and new investigative journalists who are working on this subject and in the field, like Leslie Kane and James Fox. And that really got us inspired, I think, all over again to kind of dive back into the subject matter. Just so you know, you just made our entire listenership following have a drink now, because this show's official drinking word is plethora. So if you want to get the audience a little bit, happy, already I'm reading the post. It says drink, drink, drink. So they're all having a drink because of that. So just keep up the plethoras. That'll get you in fine form with our audience tonight. Nice. Excellent. I love it.
I wish you guys could read the comments right now. Literally, it's drink, 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 drink. That's hilarious. Absolutely hilarious right now. I'm just killing myself. Awesome. Oh, pardon me. Bob in Edmonton is saying hoot because he likes his hippie lettuce. So he goes a different direction. But nonetheless, it's one of those things where, when it comes to the field of ufology, you've either haven't had any experiences or you're so experienced that you're so confused by what you've experienced that you need to investigate it more. Which realm do you guys come from here, Dale?
Well, I think, Roz is maybe the Scully to my Mulder. I definitely wanted to believe, and I think I kind of maybe approach it a bit from a bit of a spiritual perspective because of that near-death experience and kind of rubbing up against the tent of our reality and kind of seeing a rip through that tent and looking outside kind of made me really question a lot of things. And of course, that questioning leads you down the path of finding other people who question things. And I think one of the biggest pieces of intrigue for me in just exploring the UFO subject is just, learning about and meeting so many of those truth seekers and so many people who are questioning things that most people don't want to question every day, and they just want to carry on with their lives and pretend that those questions aren't there. And those questions are big questions. I mean, are we alone? That is one of the biggest, if not the biggest question that faces us. And certainly we're getting very, very, very close to answering that question. And it will be a profound change for humankind when we do get an answer, and likely we'll get an answer. At least many of us, who've looked into the topic have already decided we're not alone based on the evidence. But for the broader humankind, they'll know for certain, just like Einstein's theory of relativity, that this is so, and this is the way the universe is. So it's, I think it's something that we, if we fall into it based on just a curiosity, in terms of, is there anything more to that kind of like Richard Dolan, who is in our video series, he kind of was just, doing his doctoral dissertation and was like, okay, he's hearing about Foo Fighters or reading about Foo Fighters and like, okay, is there anything to this? UFO phenomenon, and he gets sucked into it, right? From the people like me who've had kind of certain life experiences and then have been brought into the subject field. And then there are those who have had sightings, who've been abducted. So I think it draws you in many different ways. And I think, Roz, you could speak to how you got sucked into it.
Yeah, well, for me, coming back again to just, the evidence, I think, finding out how far the UFO field has kind of come in the last 25 years, when Dale and I started digging back in about, a year and a half, 2 years ago, I joked that it was like, the middle of the cold Canadian winter, and we were, looking for some stuff to watch and fell into the UFO hole, right? Because there's just so much information out there. And then, finding the people like Leslie Kean and James Fox, like, journalists who are actually legitimately digging into the subject matter. And, Leslie Kean's book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and, Go on the Record, that book itself, I mean, to me, that just blew my mind wide open again. And I was really surprised and happy to find that book, because I thought, finally, here's somebody taking this subject matter seriously and treating it, with a journalistic rigor and an approach that, I really connect with. And, she's talking about all these different pilots and really, high up government officials and people who are extremely credentialed, and oftentimes with, multiple corroboration. So radar corroboration, multiple people seeing the same craft at the same time. Like, these are things that are, I mean, to me, coming from 25 years ago, the research, which at the time was like, what I had was like a Reader's Digest book full of first person anecdotal stories, to find this book now, which is such a great resource. I mean, for me, that just ignited, my passion all over again. That and James Fox's documentaries too, like Out of the Blue, and, pieces like that are just really well researched and really thought through and done in a really credible way. To me, that's what got me super excited about it and looking up at the skies again.
And you step into big shoes as well, because I don't think a lot of people north of the border realize how many quality ufologists are actually investigating this field that are very big names south of the border. Stanton Friedman, for one, Grant Cameron, Victor Vigiani, just to name a few of them. And, I think there is a real hidden concept here in Canada that we still keep these subjects kind of taboo. Wouldn't you say that or agree with that?
Oh,
big time. And I don't know whether it's just, again, the Canadian sensibility generally. But I also think it's just we have a lot of space. There's a lot of space out here. And distance between folks. And as a result of that, I think there's a good deal of regular sightings that occur with only a few people witnessing it, but they do happen regularly. I just came across one that happened very recently out in Manitoba, a large orb that was seen. The video was posted on Reddit recently, and there's a lot of great comments on there. And usually the Reddit UFO board is pretty scrupulous with what footage they tend to be surprised about and the rest that they dismiss. So every time there's a good piece of footage, it's funny, I say it's a 50-50 shot that it's Canadian footage, actually. So, but I think, in general, I think it's Canadian sensibility. We tend to shy away from the subject far more than down south. But we have some real heavy hitters in the community. Obviously, we got a chance to interview Stanton Friedman. And, when he came in for us to do the interview, he was kind of, dismissive about it at the beginning because he didn't know us. And we talked to him a little bit beforehand, but he said, I got 10 minutes. And then, of course, we finished up the interview 70 minutes later. And Stanton had a much different kind of sense and gave us both a hug at the end. So I think he, in our series, we try to kind of disarm everyone who's used to having their, Nick Pope having 4 seconds of what he says, cut and sliced into someone's piece. Not that it's not a valuable piece of commentary that any one of these gentlemen in our piece are making, but we really wanted to disarm them and say, hey, we want to know about you. We want to know about the history and the wisdom and the knowledge that their extensive careers, what they've collected, and find out what's still driving them today. And I think, they gave us some incredible answers, and we got to meet and see them in a way that we hadn't seen before, even though, of course, Roz and I have watched hundreds of hours of footage of documentaries and small video pieces, and every single, piece of UFO material that we could collect, and of course would see some of these guys in it over and over and over again, but never got to see them in this way and never really got to know them in a kind of personal way and hear them talk about some of the recent scientific discoveries with Kepler and finding 1 to 1.6 planets per star, and getting to hear them talk about some of the new science, and for Travis Walton to talk about some of the new scientific discoveries around his abduction and measurements they've taken at the site, and just getting to sit and get to know with them. And like I said, around Stanton, he's a huge kind of character in the UFO community, and many people know him well, and he's endeared to many, many, many people. But for us to get to kind of spend an hour with UFO Grandpa was a real treat for us. And I think for the next wave, the next generation of ufologists, you've got to not just jump into the field and get at it. While that's good, we're standing on the shoulder of giants. It's really important to absorb all of the work from really great, credible researchers like Stanton, like Grant Cameron, like Richard Dolan, and collect where they've taken their research and start at the end of their wisdom. I think that's best way I could put it.
Yeah, and to just dial it back quick to that Canadian question that you asked, Dave, I feel like in Canada, we're really hard up for coverage of our own stories, right? And, there's some amazing Canadian UFO stories out there. Like I was just bringing up the story about the farmer in Saskatchewan who had seen the discs in his field and the Mountie who came out. And, that story just recently was kind of re-released, right? But these stories don't really get told, and they don't get told in a way that captivates our imagination because there's no budgets really in Canada to cover this kind of content. There's no broadcasters that really spend money on covering this kind of content, except for maybe like the Space Channel or something. So, when you think about the broadcast environment and the money that's available to actually do this type of work in Canada, it just isn't there. So, that's where I think we really struggle in terms of having an audience in Canada and telling our own, UFO stories in Canada. It's just comes down to numbers, and in most cases, the budget just is not there.
And you bring up a good point, because the media, even the mainstream reporters that I know, when you bring up these topics to them, though, they are very, very snarky towards the stories or the fact that you may have evidence or a story here. It's like it's almost taboo that they don't want to cover it. And I find that so dismissive. I remember one time I called my own old newsroom in Vancouver. My buddy John answered the phone, and I'm like, dude, have there been any weird reports of lights over Mission, British Columbia, where I was living at the time? And he goes, no. He goes, what happened? And so I told him the story about this orb that three of us saw, went literally following the Fraser River, hung an absolute left towards Langley and Aldergrove in that area, and then did a complete 180 back over Mission, and then dipped and just disappeared. It was the strangest thing. And the first question that I got was, what are you smoking? How much have you had to drink? And even in the newsrooms, I mean, you've heard the newsrooms, you've probably taken the calls as a journalist, Roz, where, you know, people call where they've seen strange things, and we always put it off. And let me just preface to our audience here for a second. Before we get all conspiratorial, it has nothing to do with government agencies infiltrating newsrooms to say what we can and cannot run. Journalists are just fickle that way. They don't want to believe it. Would you say that really Canadian journalism drops the ball on these ideals?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's very rare that you see a story in Canadian press that is not kind of derogatory toward, you know, UFO-related topics, right? Or that it's not being written in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way. You know, like I had referenced that article that I just pulled up again. Mark Melnichuk from the Regina Leader Post wrote this piece on that sighting in Saskatchewan and just kind of rehashed it in September. And it was a great article, and I actually gave him props on Twitter and called him out for it and said, you know, really well done piece, because, you know, he wrote very clearly, he wrote very honestly about it. There's not a tinge at all in the writing of like dismissiveness or, you know, it was a very well written piece. And I think that it's all too common, you know, in Canadian media to kind of, you know, turn the nose up and like you said, kind of be, you know, I wouldn't say snarky, but like, you know, just kind of disbelieving tone. And it's always like, you know, same thing in the States too, where the UFO stories are always kind of that joke story on the evening news, right? That happens just after the weather or something. You know what I mean? And now we're going to go to that crazy UFO story, you know? So it's always been that way. And I mean, you know, Richard Dolan talks a lot about this in his interview that we did with him in the series, about Project Mockingbird in the States, you know, and talking about kind of disinformation and how it's been infiltrating through the American media. Like you said, I don't know that that's the case in Canada, in terms of disinformation actually being fed to the Canadian press here. I don't know if it's just like, you know, our disease of being too polite and, you know, it's that British sensibility where, oh my Lord, no, that can't be, you know, I'm not sure like why that is. But it's really unfortunate because there's so much of interest there. There was a sighting not too long ago. I believe it was in Bella Coola. I'm not sure if you saw that one, Dave, with the bright light behind the trees, that super bright light.
Yes.
And it was a fascinating sighting. And a couple of people posted it online. And I was blown away by that. It was absolutely stunning. So, you know, to me, those are the kinds of sightings that, like you say, you know, I'm always surprised that they don't get wider mention, that they don't get picked up, you know, in a more national news kind of way, right? But yeah, it's the same as in the States, I guess, in that way. I'm just not sure that the disinformation campaign is the same here.
I think it's more the level of embarrassment. I really think our journalists up here and probably a lot down south do not cover these stories because of the fact that they are embarrassed to put it on the air. I mean, let's face it. How many times, and show of hands, and I know we can't see any of you, but show of hands or nod your head or something. How many times when you see a UFO report on television or on the radio, it always has to start with the Star Trek or the X-Files theme song, and then it goes into the story where the reporter is trying to make a serious story about it, but then the story is absolutely lost because the anchor has to follow up with some snide, snarky comment and joke about, you know, ooh, the aliens are coming to invade or something along those lines, and it totally kills the story.
Yes, and it's interesting because we asked, I think almost every interviewee that we talk to and encounter in the series, we asked that question about, do they feel that the tide has changed in terms of people's acceptance of, UFOs, and they all said yes. Everyone we talked to agreed that the public perception of UFOs is probably at an all-time high right now in terms of belief. People tend to really believe that they do exist, and are ready for that kind of information. Yet, for some reason, the media still gloms on to this kind of ridiculous, outdated approach to their storytelling when it comes to this. And I'm not sure. Maybe it's the news heads, like the news directors in those stations, who are deciding that these stories need to be covered in a certain way, or that they can only be the joke stories. But I feel they're being left behind. I mean, in this age where Dave, you can have your radio show, we can have our show, they're really being left behind, and they're missing out, I think, on a massive audience, like, as your radio show proves as well, that is really interested in that content, right? And they're really open to receiving it and to hearing it. So, they're lost, really.
Dale, do you see it in the same regard with the media in Canada?
Yeah, I think when we interviewed Richard Dolan, he spoke to it, as Roz mentioned. He talked about Project Mockingbird, the birth of the CIA, and that, for those, as a historian, for those looking into it like he did, it was a massive effort where thousands and thousands of journalists were planting stories or plucking stories, and the government was shaping exactly the messaging they wanted to get out through the media. And he put forward that today it's an order of magnitude more powerful in terms of what they can accomplish, and that the ridicule factor and the culture of ridicule that they wanted to create around UFOs was specifically designed, especially around the Cold War, and again some of the issues that they were dealing with false alarms from various sightings being could trigger a war, could trigger a missile to be fired off. So there's some real genuine concerns around UFO sightings and warring nations. So I understand, trying to quell or control some ideations around UFOs. So it makes sense, at least from a government point of view. That seems innocuous, but realistically, I think they saw the benefit to not only hiding the kinds of covert government programs that they were already engaged in, but that also this pesky UFO phenomenon they could never get to the bottom of, well, that got washed away too in this culture of ridicule they were creating. So I really think in Canada in particular, we've just fed off of that and have towed the line in the media with that same approach. And because of a lack of resources, the inability to really investigate and properly follow up on UFO reports, they just would rather sweep it under the rug or ignore it or pretend it doesn't exist or laugh it off. So I really think it does go back to the genuine efforts around the CIA and Mockingbird, and when we started to see the culture of ridicule created, as Richard Dolan mentions in the interview piece that we did with him. And really, when you think about it, think about Roswell. Think about saucer crash in Roswell, New Mexico, or what was the title, the famous title in the Roswell Daily Record? Like, literally, the news report was a UFO crashed. And that really was the dawn of, whoa, we can't say that. That's no more of this truth stuff. It's going to set people off.
Well, and even more recently, too. Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
You even look at it, sorry, Roz, Dale, and we're Canadian people, so you're going to hear a lot of the word sorry around here, But... anyways, and now I feel like I should say sorry for interrupting.
I'm sorry that you're sorry.
Exactly. But when you look at, if we take this north of the border again, as you mentioned Roswell over there, not many Canadians know that we've had our own Roswell that was actually, in my opinion, quite more prolific than Roswell because they were exactly, Shag Harbor, where the aliens were actually alive and underwater.
Yeah, that's a crazy, crazy story. That's
Again,
wild.
we had asked everyone we interviewed about what are their favorite Canadian UFO stories, and got to hear different ones, of course, that were, fascinating for each of the interviewees. What I found, really interesting, or what I find interesting about Shag Harbor is the dearth of evidence that we've collected at this point. And again, here you go, Canadian media, lack of funding, lack of broadcasting dollars, because, man, I think Shag Harbor would make an amazing Hollywood film, start to finish.
Totally.
Another great one, Fox Lake. Richard Dolan mentions it in the interview that we did with him as well. Fox Lake, an incredible story. If your viewers or listeners haven't looked up Fox Lake, there's great stuff online about it. Incredible sighting. Again, dozens of witnesses across a large area. An incredible story. And there are just some really compelling Canadian UFO stories that never see the light of day. And what I find interesting as well, for any journalist that scoffs at current UFO reports, it doesn't take much digging to find that we've got these incredible UFO stories with amazing evidence. And in particular with Shag Harbor, I mean, you've got the RCMP involved, you've got, local police, RCMP, the U.S. Navy, the Soviets are listening to this as well. It's a crazy multi-day event with a UFO and USO. And it's just a fascinating story. And of course, we've had researchers look into Shag Harbor multiple times over the decades. And there's been so many pieces of that whole occurrence that have been put together. So again, today we've got really strong, compelling evidence of what really happened that day. And it's pretty easy to see that it was not from this earth.
Yeah, I mean, and there's also a really recent story, too. That's what I was going to touch on just a second ago, with a Porter aircraft in Toronto. I don't know if you heard about that one, Dave. This is 2016, where a Porter airplane who was flying out of Toronto, or flying into Toronto, actually, rather, preparing to land, had to actually do a nosedive to avoid an object, and a flight attendant was actually injured on the flight because it was so sudden that he dove down. That object, they have not determined what it was. They've declared it, Transport Canada has declared it a mystery object. And that came out in the news in 2016 in November. And I remember following that story so closely and, waiting to see if anything was going to be picked up on about it. And of course not, right? As soon as Transport Canada came out and just said, because at first they said, oh, it was a drone, and most people online and on Reddit boards and things like that, and myself, because, in my line of work, we fly drones. And, this is a plane out over the water. I mean, we're talking like thousands, 20,000 feet in the air, 15,000 feet in the air, preparing to come in for landing. Like, there's no drone that is flying that high, right? So there was just all sorts of inconsistencies in the story. And then ultimately they declared it literally a mystery and case closed.
Yeah, with that report in particular, the pilots reported a metallic object, and obviously it was of significant size that they needed to maneuver around this object. And of course, what's really fascinating as well from a Transport Canada point of view is there will be no further investigation and no information will be released.
It's closed. It's investigation.
It's closed.
Yeah.
And this wasn't a national story. The article you can find online is in the Toronto Sun. It's November 23rd of 2016. You can look it up. There's a few articles around that. But that was it. Case closed. Hush, hush. No more.
Yeah.
So a Freedom of Information Act will not yield any results regarding this. So, these kinds of things are happening. They happen in Canada. They're happening in contemporary times and pretty significantly. But again, that back to the original question, the unwillingness of the press to dig any deeper, or in this particular case, for a story which was, threatened the lives of hundreds of people on board, is not a national news story. When we can't figure out why or what it was that the pilots had to avoid on a clear day. It's just crazy to me that it's not of more significant interest to the press because, man, this makes good press. People get quite interested by this, and I think it would move some newspapers. And these days they need to move newspapers.
That is very true. But you know what? This is something I uncovered, and I mentioned this once before on the show, in regards to why things get silenced. And I had a recent phone call. Dale, I'm not sure if you heard this story earlier, but Roz did when we were talking. And I talked to an RCMP officer here locally who just happened to work in the in the Canadian Armed Forces right before his RCMP career got started a couple of years ago. And we were talking about protocol for the RCMP when a UFO sighting happened. Imagine my surprise when he says, in the air or on the ground? And so I said, well, let's start with in the air. And he said that if a report comes in to 911 or to the non-emergency line about a UFO being sighted over an area, their first call is to RCMP headquarters in Ottawa, who then immediately phones NORAD in Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, who then dispatches 2 CF-18 Hornets. If it's on the West Coast, it'll either be from Cold Lake, Alberta, or CFB Comox on Vancouver Island to try and intercept the craft. And if it's on the ground, the RCMP follow up with an investigation. If the craft is still there, they call in the military, which immediately that phone call also goes to NORAD at Cheyenne Mountain, which means that the American government now has full control over all Canadian UFO sightings that are reported to the Mounties.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean that what you're detailing, I think, is a compelling piece to all of this too, which, you know, some of the people in our series speak to quite candidly. But meanwhile, the press downplays or laughs or scoffs off UFO reports, the government, generally speaking, take them very, very seriously. Mm-hmm. And just like, south of the border here, Project Blue Book, after that, case closed. We're not going to investigate UFOs anymore. Way back to General Ramey, there's a certain number of, highly credible people saying very incredible things. That famous clip of General Ramey that's used in many films over and over. The Air Force tried to downplay it, et cetera. But of course, we've learned, decades later that, and of course, Nick Pope has revealed, governments are collecting mass amounts of information on the subject. Mm-hmm. The departments of the government that don't know what the other departments know collect information. They care about it, and they take it very seriously. Mm-hmm. And, that's a story in and of itself, how on one hand you have the press saying, ha, 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 little green men, mm-hmm. and you have the government, NORAD calling up and everybody getting involved to take seriously possible UFO reports. So, mm-hmm. The two things I think are very telling about where we're at in terms of the depth of government reach towards media control, and that I don't know how much is being pumped into media to continue that culture of ridicule or whether it just lives on its own right now. But it's pretty clear that governments have and continue to take the UFO issue very, very seriously. And I mean, look at here. We have the highest ranking member of any government anywhere in the world was a Canadian member when Paul Hellyer came forward with information that he had regarding UFOs and aliens. So, I think in Canada we do take it very seriously, but it's rather covert in the approach. I wanted to share a story that a friend of mine is a pilot, and I asked him very candidly about a year and a half ago. I said, have you ever seen anything while you're flying? And he told me very flatly, he said, no, I've never seen anything, but I know a few pilots who have, and I will tell you that they won't tell you what they saw, and that's it. Mm-hmm. And I said, seriously? They're not going to say anything? He said, don't ask another question about it. I was like, wow, okay. And this is normally a very friendly character. So again, there's, while there, Richard Haynes has compiled, a lot of reports to over 2,000 in his database way back when of, pilots and military service people who had in-flight UFO encounters and sightings. It happens very frequently. But again, depending on the culture and the climate of the employers that they work for, if it's just civilian or if it's a commercial flight or what have you. I mean, back to was it Captain Teriguchi?
Oh, yeah. The Japan Airlines flight.
1628.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You know, look what happened to him. He was flying a desk. You know, it took a great effort from what's his name? The U.S.
The FAA.
Callahan?
Yes.
To get him to be able to fly again. So, you know, there's an intense amount of, well, there's seriousness in how the government treats certain UFO sightings. There's also, again, this ridicule among those who fly, who observe things in the sky. And of course, we rely on these people to fly us from point A to point B in very complicated machinery.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are, you know, dozens or hundreds of lives at stake for every flight. So when a pilot or pilots report objects and it's not something they see and they fly every day, those reports are very serious reports. And I think in the particular case Roz mentioned around the Porter Airlines flight, it's pretty clear that they really want to bury some of that from the public consciousness as fast as possible, because I think people are inclined to take pilot reports more seriously because they're highly credible witnesses.
But that's the crazy thing about it, is that, you know, the pilot reports, even like we were talking about the Porter flight, you know, they tend to get buried so quickly, and there's no more research done into it, and there's no more digging. You know, the Transport Canada official in that article just basically said it was an unknown object. It was unknown to, you know, an unknown object, nothing like that they had ever seen or that we have seen. And that's it. Case closed. So you have this real reluctance, you know, from the media to dig any deeper into it. You know, like you're saying, Dale, the pilots are kind of sworn to secrecy. They're not allowed to talk out about it, right? Which also reminds me of the O'Hare incident in Chicago with the UFO hovering over the airport. And, you know, supposedly there were photos taken of that object. There were, you know, flight attendants and people on board. I think it was an American Airlines plane that had taken photos of it that were not allowed to release those photos. And they were told, you know, in no uncertain terms to not talk about it. So, yeah, there's a real culture for sure of silence around it. But what I find interesting around the government's, you know, kind of situation is, you know, with Blue Book, you had J. Allen Hynek, right, who was leading Blue Book. And then years later, he came forward and was totally a UFO advocate. So he completely flipped, right? And same thing with Nick Pope. So, you know, and now Tom DeLonge, you know, however you feel about him one way or another, he's got some government insiders on his team as well. And, you know, this is kind of what you see is like, as these people retire and they feel like they have nothing else to lose, you know, they start to come forward, right, and reveal what they know from their time spent within that institution. And that's where the really interesting stories come from, you know. That's why Nick Pope is such an interesting and intriguing character. And, you know, the same thing with J. Allen Hynek. And now, you know, I'm intrigued by this new character that's come out through Tom DeLonge's organization. I think, you know, that's where the really interesting stories come from a government perspective.
Why do you think that no other Canadian official has come out to speak about UFOs since Paul Hellyer?
Well, I mean, not to be, you know, too hyperbolistic.
Drink,
yeah, plethora. But I think I mean, he was really burned at the stake. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was really criticized pretty heavily for coming forward. Mm-hmm. You know, he was there when we were filming for Encounter the series, and he didn't want to participate. You know, I asked him a couple different times, and he really, I think he's just done with the media, because I think he just assumed that we were going to roast him, and so it's really tragic. So I think people looking at Paul Hellyer as an example are going to go, I don't want any of that. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a really good example for them to look at Paul Hellyer in this case as what may happen to them if they come forward with information. But I do think it's very difficult to come forward individually. Mm-hmm. I think if you've got a group or a number of people together who share similar stories or have kind of interlinking evidence, it can be more compelling, as well as just having the camaraderie of support. I mean, you've seen it when it comes to Rendlesham Forest and the group that, you know, Colonel Halt and Jim Peniston, et cetera, just, you know, whatever you think of that story or the characters, you know, involved there, they have some mutual support. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with the group that was put together with Stephen Bassett and the citizens panel, bringing together a number of military officials and stuff who generally, they didn't do any public speaking gigs or whatever. They maybe made some reports or what have you. Folks like Ray Bowyer, who's just a private pilot or whatever, doesn't really want the spotlight or to relive these stories over and over and over again. But they get together and they try to, put their case forward. And I think it's pretty compelling in that regard. So I would hope if there are Canadian officials that were interested in communicating what information they may have, they should reach out to someone like Grant Cameron and try to connect with people in the UFO community in Canada to find out, you're not alone. You're definitely not alone. And maybe get connected with a few others who are interested and itching to kind of tell what they know. And I think that's kind of the cautionary tale is Paul Hellyer, he went guns a-blazing. And unfortunately, the media pulled out their machine guns and gunned them down there.
Mm-hmm.
The funny part about Paul Hellyer is when he was defense minister under Diefenbaker in Canada's centennial anniversary in 1967, he actually, on July 3rd, went to St. Paul, Alberta, I believe it was, where they built a UFO landing pad where he helped christen it. And at that time, I remember when he was on this show, I asked him, I said, did you know about UFOs back then when you were defense minister? And he adamantly said no.
Wow.
And then 3 months later, exactly 3 months later, on October 3rd, while he is still defense minister, Shag Harbor happens.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So the UFO pad worked, just not the way we thought it
would. Absolutely. And it's funny because we see so much of this, this cover-up where people come out after, and I always found that a little bit odd because, being the highest-ranking government official, would all of a sudden flip the light switch? You know what I'm saying? Like he had to see something.
I think it was. I think for Paul, it was coming across information that he got from somebody who he thought was very credible. And after reviewing that information, if I recall correctly, I mean, you might know better than I do, Dave, but I think what happens usually with highly intelligent people, they're capable of changing their minds and they're capable of doing complete 180s. And I think it's something that, of course, the general public, generally we don't like when people flip-flop on positions with politicians, et cetera. But usually it's the mark of highly intelligent people to be willing to change their position on things when new information arrives to them that's credible and compelling. It's certainly, should the efforts undertaken by scientists are, whatever their thoughts are about the experiments they may run or their hopes, the evidence is what, obviously is the most important thing in terms of the results of experiments. And if the results of experiments show X when they thought it would be Y, they have to move their heads over to X being the reality. And I think for Paul Hellyer, he came across information which he thought was so compelling that it completely moved his position from where he stood. And he probably was like many of us, that generally felt that there was really nothing to it, to just anecdotal stories, et cetera, and that it really wasn't something that he should concern himself with deeply. But I mean, it of course, and I don't think he's ever really declared it in a clear way, at least not that I've come across, what really changed his position. But it seems like it was something so profound that it moved him completely from where he was previously into the beliefs he now holds.
Yeah, and did he come out with that information after he retired, Dave? Do you know?
Oh, much further. I believe he came out in the 90s. He came out saying that it was real. That's what I find disappointing. I mean, if we have a history of this, and depending on how tied in to NORAD the Canadian government is when it comes to its findings with UFOs, that's where I see the real danger of it all, that maybe Canadians aren't getting the full information or the full scope of what is actually happening in ufology here across across Canada.
Yeah, we're not. And I think it's important to remember, 9/11 happening. And I think there's a real change because there was a real interconnection of security and military intelligence between the U.S. and Canada after 9/11. And I think, it's very telling when you think about Paul Hellyer coming forward in the 90s. Well, that was prior to 9/11, and that there's been a real tightening of the taps, so to speak, in terms of what could get out. And I think, unfortunately, we're in a bit of a dark age from kind of government leaks or officials in Canada coming forward or coming out right now. I mean, and it may unfortunately be, again, our folks who have retired and are closer to the ends of their lives saying, screw it, here's what I know.
Yeah, and I think, too, that it's such, government officials are no different than every other, person in terms of their likelihood of coming forward, right? And I think everybody, it's like Richard Dolan speaks to, that the ridicule culture, and that when you're concerned about your job, when you're concerned about your own welfare and your own well-being, your family's well-being, you're concerned about being branded like, some sort of loon, right? It's not surprising that people don't come forward. Like, I'm always happy to see that people do come forward after they retire, and there are, these people that are brave enough to step forward once they've left, public life and they've entered their retirement years. Because, at least those stories get out into the public, right? Because otherwise they would just die with them. So, it's unfortunately, it's just the culture. It's our culture of ridicule that keeps people silent, whether they're a government official or just an average Joe.
We only have about a minute here before we need to go to break here. When we get back from the break, I want to get into how do you convince a mainstream public perception about this subject, about taking it more seriously. And we're going to get into that as well as with our audience questions in hour number 2 as they start to absolutely line up here, because we always like to get our audience involved in this show. That's what makes this show kind of different from everyone else's out there. So
love it.
Yeah, so I hope you guys don't mind. I know that there are a few questions, and they will pile up. So I'm going to get you guys to hold on. Our guests tonight are Roz and Dale Mugford. They are brand new to the field of ufology over the last couple of years. They are filming a series called the Encounter Series. Find them on Twitter, Encounter Series. Follow them. This is something for all of us, not just Canadians, but for all of us to follow, because they want to actually take the documentary and let the guests speak instead of like a 5-second snippet of a clip to make it sound like whatever they want it to sound like. It's true journalism at its best. We'll be back with hour number 2 of Spaced Out Radio right after this. Stick around, because we're talking UFOs all night long on the mighty SOR.
365 days a year, we're in the field, investigating UFO sightings, talking to alien abductees, and visiting secret military locations like Area 51. We're UFO Seekers, official partner of Spaced Out Radio. Follow our daily search for the truth at ufoseekers.com or like us on social media. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
From coast to coast to coast, Blacklight Uncharted is taking on the paranormal across Canada. From ghostly hauntings to the UFOs flying above in conjunction with MUFON Canada, we're closely investigating what's going on in the northern skies and checking out the apparitions that walk among us. Check out our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com. We want to know your thoughts, we want to hear your experiences, and we want you to share your stories. The answers are out there, and we intend to find them.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
It's paranormal news at its finest. Welcome to The Encounter. At spacedoutradio.com, The Encounter online is SOR's trusted news source for everything weird and strange going on around the world. This is news editor Eric Markham. Our team of journalists are scouring the planet for those strange stories that rarely make the mainstream. No fear-mongering or fake news here. Head over to spacedoutradio.com and encounter The Encounter.
Want to learn more about aliens, cover-ups, conspiracies, cryptids, and the paranormal? All you have to do is tune in S4 as we take over the Spaced Out Radio Night, starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, each and every Saturday night, right after Spaced Out Saturdays. Hi there, this is Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. Join me, Corey Ruiz, and friends as we discuss the hot topics of the night. It's fun, entertaining, and as dark as the night. Find us at spacedoutradio.com.
Hey, this is Canadian Paranormal Investigator Mike Moore. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. So get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut, and join us, eh?
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your 4-Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
Want a place to share your experiences without feeling judged? We have the place for you. If you've experienced sightings or contact with ETs, ghosts, cryptids, or UFOs, and you'd like someone to confidentially look into the matter, just fill out an SOR Sightlines report. Our goal is to help you get the answers you need to the experiences you've had with our professional team of researchers. Your information stays 100% confidential. The SOR Sightlines report. Fill out your experience today only at spacedoutradio.com.
Psychic Sundays, spiritual communication, ET contact, Sasquatch in your backyard. We will have it all on Cosmic Passport with me, Elizabeth Anglin. Each Sunday starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, at spacedoutradio.com, I will take you on a journey of enlightenment. The goal is learning from the soul on out. We'd love it if you joined our experience, Cosmic Passport, heard Sundays at spacedoutradio.com.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
From British Columbia to Northern California, Pacific North Weird has Cascadia covered. Check out our feature videos at spacedoutradio.com, where I, Vincent Zunza, and my super sleuth partner Alexandra Sullivan track down the weird and strange stories from around the Pacific Northwest, from Bigfoot to Mel's Hole and everything in between. This is what makes life exciting. So why report the normal when we can report the Pacific North Weird right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
Welcome to Spaced Out Saturdays with me, Dave Cruz from Beyond the Strange. Our weekly feature on spacedoutradio.com will take you around the world discussing everything from the paranormal to the latest conspiracies from the top guests in their fields. We won't leave any story uncovered. Spaced Out Saturdays at spacedoutradio.com starting 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to the second hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, Brian Snoddy and James Fetzer are going to join us. Fetzer in hour number 1 and 2 and 3. Brian Snoddy, we're going to be talking about the JFK assassination on the anniversary date of Dealey Plaza's incident. 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. We are also live on KTLK, the Fringe.fm, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas, and if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember, the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Yes. Catoptromancy. Catoptromancy is your password. Nobody knows what it means, but Bill sets a password each and every night, right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so on Twitter, at Spaced Out Radio. Use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio if you want to connect live with me during the show as well. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. You can also join us for live chat on the SOR Space Travelers group on Facebook. We're on Instagram, Dave Scott, SOR. You can find our brand new YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to it. Spaced Out Radio. No longer Spaced Out Radio Show. We are also on iHeartRadio in the United States. TalkStream Live. You can tune us in on TuneIn. Download and subscribe to our shows on iTunes. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club for $5 a month. You can shop at our Spaced Out Radio store. Rock out to some Bumblefoot. Watch some great videos from UFO seekers, Contact TV, and read your daily news on The Encounter Online, where we got everything going from paranormal to science, absolutely everything at The Encounter. Tonight we are talking about the Encounter series. No connection to the Encounter Online. It's one of those synchronistic things. Our guests tonight are Canadian ufologists Roz and Dale Mugford, and they are doing a documentary series on breaking down the field of ufology with real interviews that aren't edited. They aren't subject to cutting down the words to whatever the topic du jour of the documentary is. Roz and Dale, welcome back to SOR. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Dave. It's good to be here. Dave.
In hour number 2, we always get our questions from the audience because we like to include them as well. And while we're waiting for those questions to pop up, I wanted to ask you guys, and Roz, we'll start with you on this one, but how do you believe or how do you feel we have to try and convince a mainstream public, including the media, to start taking these topics a little bit more seriously?
That's such a tough question, but I mean, that's what's kind of drawn us into this again, I think. Like, you know, for Dale and I, like I was mentioning earlier, you know, when we started to dig back into this, for me, I hadn't looked into the UFO topic really for about 25 years. It was something that I was really interested in as a kid, and then I kind of, like I said, I kind of put it on a shelf. And for whatever reason, you know, you're growing up, you've got a family and all of that jazz. And then finally came back around to it more recently, you know, and was just really, really intrigued by the information and the real, you know, journalism that currently exists out there by people like Leslie Kean, James Fox. You know, and so for me, you know, like Dale was joking earlier, I'm kind of the Scully to his Mulder. So, you know, I'm always kind of, you know, the slightly more skeptical. And I really needed, you know, the hard facts. I really needed the evidence. I really needed to, you know, read those books, you know, like Leslie Kean's book, you know, to kind of bring me back around and, you know, and pique my interest. I mean, you know, I did come from, you know, somewhat of a journalistic background. So for me, it was really important that I had that, you know, that proof and that, you know, those those really credible eyewitnesses and reports from those pilots and those government officials, and and also corroboration. So I mean, I think for Dale and I, when we started to see the evidence, I mean, this is the whole thing with the UFO topic. It's like once you start looking into it, it's really impossible to say there's nothing going on. But I mean, you have to take those first steps and you have to start doing that research and digging into it. And then you find the stories, and then you find the corroborating stories, and then you find the credible witnesses. And for me, that's what did it. So I think that's what we were aiming to do with Encounter the series, because we had just gotten back into the subject matter, and we had started to discover, like for us, I mean, this is probably hilarious to your audience, but we really had no idea who Stanton Friedman was, who Nick Pope was, who Richard Dolan was. These were all just kind of experts that were being, gone to for a soundbite in a documentary. We had no idea who they were beyond that. So, when we stumbled across them about 2 years ago, I mean, we were both just kind of gobsmacked, because here were really credible individuals that had really intriguing stories to share, and who were obviously, dedicating their lives to the subject matter. So, for us, we wanted Encounter the series to somewhat embody that, in terms of, we wanted the audience to be able to feel like, even if you're a skeptic, like I was initially coming back into the subject matter, you can sit down with this series, you can watch these interviews with these people, and you're going to have the experience of having like an actual chat with them. It's very, there's not many cuts. The whole idea is for it to be kind of a stream of consciousness thing. You would get this, Dave, it's very much like a radio interview. So, I'm a huge fan of This American Life and kind of, more meditative qualities of radio. And so I really wanted Encounter the series to have that feeling, in terms of, this is our methodology. We want these people to feel comfortable. We want them to know that we're not going to chop them into sound bites. And we want the audience to feel like they're getting a really good look at who these people are one-on-one. Because I think for skeptics and people getting into the field, that's the first thing you think when you start to hear these stories. You look at the person who's telling the story and you go, is this person credible, or is this person full of shit, right? Like, really, that's what you're thinking the whole time. You're weighing it in your head, right? You're like, okay, so here's the story. It sounds credible, but is this person credible? And you kind of go back and forth. And, what we found with Stanton and Nick and Richard, Stephen Bassett, these are all very passionate people. They're all very educated people. They're incredibly, they're credible, hugely credible. They've done, they've worked in the field. Richard Dolan's a historian. Stanton Friedman's a physicist. Nick Pope worked at the Ministry of Defense in the UK on their UFO project for years. I mean, you cannot deny the credibility of these people, and you cannot deny the passion of these people. And so, for us, we wanted our audience, who are likely skeptics, to be able to come into the series, watch this, and then walk away and then make their own call in terms of, whether they think these people are credible or not. My feeling is, after watching Encounter the series, people are going to feel like there's something here, right? Even if they're not full-on believers, they're definitely going to have their interest piqued. So that's what we were hoping to do there.
Yeah, I think from my side, Dave, it's, blue pill, red pill. If somebody doesn't want to go down the rabbit hole, if they're a really hardline skeptic, there's really nothing you can say or show them that's going to convince them, because as Stanton says, don't bother me with the facts, my mind's made up. They're unreachable. But I think for a great many people, they're fairly open-minded. They might be, reasonably skeptical, but skeptical and admitting that they haven't really looked into it. So, our goal was to try and produce something that would allow them to look into it without going too far down the rabbit hole, and just kind of meeting these people. And that was the whole premise of the series, is have an encounter with Stanton Friedman, have an encounter with Nick Pope, put the spotlight on them. And of course, the imagery we used on the cover is, of course, a UFO with a spotlight on a chair. So the idea is, we've got these people, we've abducted these folks, for a dedicated interview where you can just get to see them and analyze them and their credibility and who they are as people. In particular, what stood out to me was Travis Walton, because he just is such a casual, likable, down to earth kind of guy. And when you think about what happened to Travis and so many years later where he is in his reflections on it, that it's still evolving in his processing of what had happened, and his keen interest still to find new scientific evidence to corroborate what happened to him on that day. I mean, it's just so deeply compelling. And, he didn't walk in there with an Armani suit. He's, I think some people would like to think, oh, well, they make a lot of money. Well, he doesn't make a lot of money, and I can tell you there's many different ways to make a lot more money than traveling around to UFO conventions and talking about your abduction. So, what's going to keep you going if this is a made-up story decades later without being crazy, without, losing your lucidity and becoming just an incredibly wacky character? Lies will do that, but the truth won't. And the truth, at least what shines through for me, for someone like Travis Walton, is it's just incredibly compelling. You're just left with this man, claims that this happened to him. He's claimed it for a very long time, and he stands by that, and you just have to stare him in the eye and deal with the reality of where that might shake you. So I hope that things like our series would move people from their place, if they're slightly skeptical, to being a little more intrigued and opening the door. I think people like Leslie Kane have done that as well, has moved some of the mainstream folks to investigating it a little bit more. And I think as soon as they start to go down that rabbit hole a little bit, they'll discover there's quite a huge dearth of compelling evidence. And so I think the effort has to be not on, worrying about the staunch skeptics or worrying about, the mass media all of a sudden really being warm to the subject. I think it's really a ground game. It's one by one, and just in interviewing everybody for the series, as Roz mentioned in the previous hour there, I was really kind of intrigued by their sense that it's improving, that there is more of an openness, and that it is getting better in terms of the overall perception around it. Travis Walton mentioned that he feels that the sightings are less sightings and more of showings. Travis feels that there's some coordinated effort from UFOs to kind of reveal themselves just a little bit at a time, not enough to cause a huge panic, but that it's a part of an effort that they're undertaking. That's his kind of perception about what's happening. So, maybe there's that effort on the UFO side, and then for us, a warming up to it individually to reach some kind of critical mass of awareness and acceptance. And maybe that's the way that the tide turns overall around the planet towards UFOs. And let's keep in mind that there are many countries around the world where it's more matter of fact, where the openness, Belgium, South American countries like Chile. The openness towards it and acceptance of UFOs as a fact of life is very different from, of course, North America, in particular the U.S. and Canada, and even in the U.K. and some of the European countries. So there are many places where it's very accepted. So we have to keep that in mind. But in terms of Western culture, I think, it's a ground game kind of thing. And I think if we can contribute a little bit towards that ground game, then that's a good start.
And I think too, the science is really doing a lot of that work, for us now. I mean, this was another really fun kind of topic that we bring up with a lot of the interviewees in the series, getting to talk to Stanton Friedman about, Kepler. And, I said to Dale, I think that was like probably one of the highlights of my life, to be able to sit across from this physicist and talk about Kepler and, what his thoughts are in terms of, life in the universe. And, so, I mean, with every day, now in the news, you're opening up your browser and you're reading about new exoplanet discovered that is likely, a good candidate for life, and it's only 11 light years away from Earth. And, this is happening every day now. I mean, Kepler has proven that, for every star in the sky, there's at least one planet. I mean, that's a mind-blowing revelation scientifically. I mean, from when I was a kid and there were only X number of planets, in our solar system, and that was it, to now, no, there's one planet for every star. I mean, that's just absolutely That's mind-blowing. So, I mean, I think that the science is now proving that, the probability of life in the universe is exponentially higher than we, had even imagined. So it's a really exciting time scientifically. And I think that that's, it's giving a lot of, kind of buoyed by it, because I feel like they by the science that's coming the existence of life. I mean, NASA came out and said that they believe that within 20 years, right, that we're going to prove that there's life in the universe. So, it's just a matter of time. And, the science is proving what these guys have for so long been saying, right? So it's a really exciting time scientifically. And I think that that's really helping, public perception and people kind of make the leap over to belief.
Outside of the groups that you guys have talked to and the longtime researchers whom you filmed, do you believe in the people that you have talked to in your everyday lives about this are ready to learn about UFOs? Dale?
That's a good question. I think some are and some aren't. I think it really depends on where people are at. Mentally, spiritually, their age, their maturity, in terms of their openness towards it. But I do think that mainstream culture through, indoctrination in film and television has, generally given most people these days some awareness. I think, culturally, we can all picture in our minds what a gray alien is. And so, there's a certain palatability that everyone has to information around the UFO subject. I think, going back to what we talked about in the first hour there, that there are certainly in Canada, there are very compelling cases which really aren't a part of the kind of cultural makeup. We don't have them in our kind of cultural story. So we don't have Fox Lake and Shag Harbor, and we don't have, if I mention, the top 3 UFO sighting stories from Canadian history, I bet you I could walk down the street and there wouldn't be a single person who could list 2 of them, maybe not even one of them. So we really are lacking in that. And I think that would really boost kind of public acceptance towards it if we knew we had some incredibly compelling cases with physical evidence, multiple corroborated reports of sightings, including officials, police officers, military officials, etc. So I hope that, there are more efforts in the broader community, the media, to disseminate some of these stories, because I think they're really important. And I think people like us, if we had some more resources, we'd probably definitely endeavor to do documentaries, specifically trying to mine some of these Canadian stories. It's definitely something that we've thought about doing, and it doesn't mean it's something we won't do. But currently, obviously financial resources are the number one blockade on trying to do it right, because you want the quality level, the production value to be befitting of these cases. And when you look at some of them, like Fox Lake, for example, it's a massive UFO, an absolutely massive UFO. And so the graphics work that's required to do that effectively, as well as having, the locations shooting for all of that and, coordinating all of that, it's a big barrier. But I think it will happen, whether it's us or someone else, to kind of uncover these stories and reveal them to Canadians in particular, to help broaden our acceptance of what's happened in the UFO field over the last 20, 30 years and beyond that. So those are all factors, I think, in improving the mainstream acceptance of the topic. And like Roz said as well, I think it's when Seth Shostak, noted skeptic around UFOs, is forced to say, between the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to have proof of life on other planets. Wow. Right? There are major scientific mainstream personalities who are openly talking now about the day we discover life. And of course, they're stopping short at intelligent life, but it seems almost daily to read about, these researchers over here have found this planet and it's consistent with, a Dyson sphere, at least in early reports or what have you. There's a lot of curiosity. People are poring over the data. I mean, most regular people wouldn't know, but we haven't analyzed all of Kepler's data. I mean, it's an immense amount of data. And so all these different groups and different teams around the world are analyzing this data, choosing little stars and little sections of the sky to look at and analyze. So it's a massive intercontinental coordinated effort to look at all this data. But what I find the most intriguing is what they're really looking for is they're looking for life, and they're looking for the proof of the existence of life beyond Earth. That's the number one thing they want to find. And there are more and more scientists who are licking their lips at being the ones to discover life on other planets. They want to make their career. They want to be the first country to discover it. So it's a really exciting time, and it's adding fuel to the fire. And I think it definitely fuels acceptance towards the subject. And I hope that, what I got the sense when we were doing the interviews of the longtime UFO researchers in our series, I really got the sense that, certainly for someone like Stanton, there's a little bit of kind of a forlorn quality to him that, he wasn't able to crack it. He wasn't able to crack, he did the documentary in 1979, UFOs Are Real, which is a really great old UFO documentary for anyone who hasn't come across it. I think you can find it on YouTube. And he's really trying to lay out a systematic format for presenting evidence and an argument for why we should accept that UFOs are real. And that was back in 1979. And so he's really spent his life, trying to educate and advocate. And I think there's a sense from everybody we interviewed that, man, they're waiting for the day where, their life's work is vindicated. And it could happen very, very soon.
Well, I think too that, people in general, there's a huge amount of fear around the subject. And also I think, a lot of people are like, I was like we were to a certain extent, which is like, UFO, whatever your thing is, and then you become an adult, you focus on career, you're focusing on work, you really don't give it much more thought. And then, if you're lucky, you take the time to kind of reconnect with that part of yourself, that childhood, curious part of yourself again, and you kind of unlock that Pandora's box again. You go back to that. And once you start looking, it's impossible to refute all of the evidence. And I mean, I think that, what Dale and I have discovered is it's really hard to talk about this kind of thing with people who are staunch skeptics without just sounding absolutely bananas, because, we've done so much research that even as we start talking about all of the research, people who haven't done any reading on the subject just kind of look at you like, whoa, like you've been spending a lot of time reading on this stuff, right? So it's like inevitable that, people who haven't looked at the subject matter at all, it's inevitable that they're going to be overwhelmed really fast. Exactly. When you start coming up with the Ray Balliers and the Paul Helliers and the Rendlesham Forests and the Japan Airlines and all of this stuff that's just so well known in ufology now. But for someone who hasn't looked at it, probably since their childhood, all of this information is just like absolutely overwhelming. So, it's really difficult for people who haven't looked into it and haven't read up on it, in the last X number of years to kind of bring them up to speed without completely freaking them out, just because there is so much amazing research and so much amazing evidence out there. So, I'll generally just point people to Leslie Kane's book because I feel like it's the most kind of palatable, easy reading, like well-researched and documented, it's like the gateway drug, right? It's like, okay, just here, read this. And it's the primer and it's all corroborated and everyone is very credible. And, you're going to get through this and it's going to blow your friggin' mind, and then when you're done reading this, then come back and we'll have another conversation. Right. So, yeah.
You know what's funny about what you guys were saying? Do you think that small town Canada is ready for any type of disclosure? And I'll tell you the reason why I asked that is in my community 29 and a half years ago, Miriam Delicado was taken in 100 Mile House on the 99 Mile Hill. And it is rated one of the best UFO experiences that people have recorded in North America. It ranks up there with Betty and Barney Hill, so on and so forth. And the point that I'm getting at is I notice in my community, which the town it's small, it's maybe 3,000-4,000 people. You know, if you go to the extended area, maybe we're up to 10,000 to 20,000. But the whole point is there are many people in this community who don't like to talk about that. They would sooner forget about it, you know, that it's just not them. And I know with my own paranormal tour that I do here at the museum, there are people upset that I am exploiting the paranormal with it. So do you really think that people are ready to learn the truth, whatever that truth may be?
I think, you know, for me, I think we can handle the truth. I think we can't handle the lies. I think, you know, when we think about all of what's happened, you know, we're the government to turn around and say in the U.S. and say, actually, yes, UFOs exist, aliens exist, you know, and they give us their reasons for why they held that information back for us. What's going to really burn us is not the truth that they're real. It's going to be the lies that they told for so long, and hiding that truth from us. And I think in the sense of, you know, small towns, I think the thing is that many small towns, you know, we're right now in Prince Edward County, Ontario, Canada, and it's a pretty small community here. I think there's 6,000 people in Picton.
No, I think there's 3. We might be in a town the same size as yours, Dave.
Yeah, it's pretty small. And, you know, out here, you know, you get a good look at the skies. And out here, I think, you know, a lot of people know pretty much everybody else in town. And so it's really tough when someone has an experience because, you know, it can rock a community. It can rock that person's life. And yeah, they just wanted to go away. But I would think, though, if you could kind of ask them impartially, you know, do you think UFOs exist? You're going to find most of the people in that town are going to say yes. That's going to be the truth of it. And I have a great kind of anecdotal story just in and around this. It's a little bit of a side story, but I just thought of it now, Dave, and I wanted to share it. A couple of years back, I was standing on the driveway. My dad is retired just about 40 minutes from here. And we're standing on the driveway, and we're looking up at the sky, and, you know, we're just standing out there, and it was his birthday. And he had told me that, like some nights he thinks he sees things. And my dad is a very straightforward guy. He worked at a bank for 25 years, and I couldn't believe what was coming out of his mouth. I'm like, my dad believes in UFOs? I had no idea.
Had a few more beers?
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. And I think, again, being out in the country and his exposure out there, his ability to see the sky and look up and start to notice things that were quite odd to him, you know, piqued his curiosity. Generally I think there's more openness, actually. That's my take, is there'd be more openness in small towns. Now, do people want to admit it publicly? Probably not. But if you're able to privately poll everyone, I think there'd be more acceptance towards UFOs than in urban environments where everybody's too busy to look up.
I think, you know, it was interesting because in the series, we ask a lot of the interviewees this question, you know, which is, you know, what happens the day after, you know, #disclosure. And, you know, I think it was really divided in terms of the answers. You know, I think some of the experts felt, you know, that people are ready and, you know, that it's been, you know, it's been coming for a long time, so we're kind of ready for this information. There's more general openness toward it. You know, you get then, you know, the Travis Walton, you know, his theory, which was, you know, it's not more a sighting, it's more of a showing, and that they've been revealing themselves to us for a long time in order to kind of get us ready, you know. But even that being said, Travis Walton, he said if he felt that the day after disclosure, there would be total panic, there would be total chaos. So, I think it's really like, is the glass half full or empty? It's the way you view the world, right? For some people, I think it would be completely, bone shaking right down to the ground, your worldview, especially for, people who are like ultra religious, and see the world through a narrow view. For those people, it's going to be absolutely shattering. For people like us and people who are more open-minded and who have explored the subject, it's going to be more like, yep, thought so, it's not going to really shake us. It's still going to be an amazing discovery, when we do finally get the scientific revelation that there's been life found. But we're going to kind of have that sense of, yeah, we knew this was coming. So, and we've been talking about it in advance. And, I think the people who are more open-minded and who have been talking about it and being open to the subject in advance, they're going to be the ones who are far more prepared to deal with that day, which, as NASA says, within 20 years is coming, that we discover life outside of our own planet.
Let's get to Corey's question here. She is asking, she says she has met a couple of famous people who investigate UFOs that said they've never had a real sighting. That seems hard for her to believe. What do you think about researchers who've never had an experience?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of one myself. I think I've, with Roz one day, we saw some very large objects over Lake Ontario, and I can't say for certain that I really feel they were UFOs. We had posted them online on Reddit, and there were some ideas back and forth around what they could be. We actually had some photos, and we had posted those photos and asking for inquiries to it. And I think the last kind of bit about it was that it was a certain type of blimp.
Or there was some sort of Air Force base or something nearby, and they were some sort of craft from there. But yeah, blimp.
But that's about the best that everybody could figure out of it. So that's kind of the closest sighting that we've had. But would I really call it a sighting? No, because for me, like a real sighting would be where I kind of know intuitively that what I'm seeing is impossible.
Not from here.
Yeah, and I think that someone like Richard Dolan, who's like a keen historian and researcher, I think they can do a huge service to the field with their passion and intrigue to research the field that you don't necessarily have to have had an experience to have a deep interest and intrigue. And perhaps from a mainstream perspective, someone like Leslie Kane, for example, they lend a certain credibility to just be somebody who's deeply interested, has looked at the evidence or information, and is interested in pursuing that information and evidence. And I think that, while it's a great credential to have had some kind of experience, and that, of course, for many people, it's a real gateway into the field and meeting people in the field for that sense of community that you have, that you don't feel alone in being the only one who's been, abducted or the only one who's seen something out in the field one day. I don't think it's necessarily a requirement for UFO research to have had a specific experience.
Yeah, and I think too that, there's just, like I said before, there's that basic, really childlike curiosity that we are all born with, right? And, for me, it was that childlike curiosity that drove me to, read my book cover to cover and absorb as much information about UFOs as I could when I was a kid. And then we kind of put that away. And, regardless of whether you've had a sighting or an experience or not, I think that, being able to tap back into that and just be open-minded and, open to the idea of there being something more than life here on Earth, I think, that's just, I think it's a great quality to have. And, like Dale was saying, it's not necessary to have had an experience to just have that innate childlike curiosity about the world, right? So, yeah, I would agree.
Corey's follow-up question to you is, why do you think they haven't had an experience? And we're talking people like, for instance, Stanton Friedman, who's been researching UFOs for 40-plus years, and he claims he's never seen one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to, I don't know that Stanton's I mean, we didn't ask him this, but that would be a good kind of follow-up question for Stanton is, like, had he spent any significant dedicated time trying to see one? Because I think there's lots of evidence of individuals who have made the effort to see one. There's a gentleman in the States, and it was covered on a news broadcast, who could actually summon them. And of course, the news broadcast, they thought this guy was crazy, and they're filming him, and it was a very ha-ha. And then you can kind of see the moment where the news broadcaster and the camera person are freaking out when one actually comes out of the clouds, exactly as he kind of described them, and how they maneuver and came closer to them. It's an amazing thing. You can find it online. I think it was Chicago, if I recall correctly. But I don't think someone like Stanton, like, I don't think he spent a lot of time trying to see them. I think he was trying to look at the data that had been collected, in particular, his early work around Project Blue Book, and saying, they did all the research, they looked into all the reports, and let me analyze all this data and see, are they lying? Are they telling the truth? And, what can I, as a scientist here with hard, cold data, prove about what I can collect and what I can do? That's what service I can provide the community. And he tried to do that work, and I think he did it quite successfully.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, there's, Stanton is definitely, he's a 100% tried and true physicist. He's definitely someone who, sees the truth in the numbers and in the data, as opposed to seeing an actual craft. And to me, there's something almost more wondrous about that than even someone who's seen a craft and believing it. I almost feel like, if you're able to see that in the numbers and get excited about it, there's something really great about that.
It is interesting because, you think of these top-line researchers who haven't had an experience, and a lot of times what they are doing is they're dismissing now the experience people are having. And what I mean by that is they're saying, you know what, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, we've heard that story so much. I'm so sorry it happened to you. But, I'm very glad that you told me, but it's not going to help my research. And I couldn't believe a couple of months ago when we had Grant Cameron on talking about his new book, Charlie Red Star, when all of a sudden, all of a sudden he was saying, maybe it's time for us to get back to the stories that people are telling, because that's where the puzzle pieces may lie in order to understand what is going on. Because of CGI, because of the way science is treating these topics, and the governments especially are treating these topics, we're just not getting any closer to the answers. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm thinking about John Mack and John Mack's research. I'm thinking about that it wasn't any one experience from the people that John Mack worked with. It was the fact, it was the compiling of the volume and the similarities and connections between them that compelled John Mack to come to the startling revelations that he did, which is, hey, abductions are real, in my opinion, based on his professional background and then all of the experiencer reports. So again, any one individual sighting or experience, whether it be abduction, close encounter of the third kind, fourth kind, etc., on their own aren't compelling, whether they're not compelling to the media or what have you. And again, from a scientific standpoint, it's not that it doesn't matter. It's just that it's very difficult for any top-line researcher to take that report and then do much with it, because they can't go and flag down the craft and say, come back here for a minute, I'd like to talk with you. They've just got that one report. But I do think there's some credence to collecting these reports and trying to analyze them. I know that certain researchers do try to do that. They look at the MUFON reports. They try to pull in all this aggregate data. I think the one thing for me, and I have a background in software development, and I look at this and say, there's a bit of a data problem here. We live in the age of information and machine learning and using, artificial intelligence algorithms to parse data and produce meaningful results. So there's a real potential for digitizing a lot of information. And certainly I was thinking about stuff like what Richard Haynes has in his database and saying, man, it'd be really great if we had a compendium of all of these reports digitized in such a manner that, people such as myself could try to comb through that and find patterns in the static. And so I do think that there is something. I think every UFO sighting, every UFO experience is important and valid and should be documented, because whether it's the researcher today or a researcher tomorrow, the information and having access to that information for those researchers is valuable.
Well, and there's long been a breakdown between, the scientific method, right, and anecdotal evidence, right? People coming forward with stories, right, that don't fit into the scientific method in terms of how scientists are, look at this type of information, right? That's been around for forever. So, I mean, there's nothing new there, right? I do agree, though, with Dale's, discussion about data, and I got to let you read there, and how that could be totally helpful in terms of kind of, doing mapping and actually like plotting out, where experiences have happened, and then, using that data to kind of draw a map and get a sense of, the larger picture. I think that would be, super helpful in terms of kind of aligning all of these stories and starting to put more of like a heat map together, if you will, for, what's going on where. But I think, that breakdown between the scientific method and anecdotal evidence it's always been such a huge barrier. And I mean, you hear it as still in, for example, okay, everybody's got a smartphone. Well, why are there no pictures, right? Everybody's got a smartphone now. Why are there no great videos? I work in the video field, right? So I work with video cameras. I am very aware of their limitations, technically. I'm very aware of how incredibly difficult it is to get a good shot of something that is far away on a handheld device with a zoom. I mean, it's next to impossible, right? So, there's always been that frustration, I think, between people saying, I saw this thing. That's why, James Fox's documentary is called I Know What I Saw, right? Because there's all of these people, a lot of it is around the Phoenix Lights, but, they're also incredibly frustrated saying like, I know what I saw. You can't tell me I didn't see what I saw, regardless of what, the scientists want to say or the researchers or the press want to say, I know, right? So yeah, there's always been that breakdown, and I don't know what the answer is there. I don't know that there really is one. It is nice to see researchers and people like Stanton because, they do have a scientific background and a physics background, and they are able to bridge that gap between, the dearth of, hard evidence and actually starting to do their own digging and trying to find the evidence, right? As opposed to saying, well, I just don't see it, so it's just not there. Someone like Stanton actually digs. He actually takes the Project Blue Book data and crunches all of the numbers, and comes up with his own thesis. I mean, bless those people, because there's not many of them, right? They don't exist. There's not too many. So, I wish that science was more open-minded in that way. I'm hopeful that with, all of the new discoveries with Kepler and exoplanets and, possibilities for life in the universe, that maybe that will change. I just feel like that clash has been going on since, the early days of mankind, right?
I want to get to Joe's question, and I'm going to rephrase it here a little bit, because he is asking if you've ever interviewed somebody that claimed to be an alien. But I'm going to rephrase this a little bit. Do you plan on taking more intimate stories from people with their contact in the next realm of videos?
I would say that we've definitely interviewed people who claim to be human.
Nice.
I mean, at least with the series, we were interested in kind of interviewing ufologists and getting to know the ufologists, kind of, getting to know the people behind the camera, getting to know the people doing the research, getting to know them in a way that you otherwise wouldn't get to know them. Mini documentaries in a way of just just being able to explore who this person is and what their kind of thoughts and ideas are around some of the big questions in and around the field, in their own life experience, et cetera, just so that there's kind of that documentation of these people and that kind of establishment of credibility that they are intelligent, thoughtful individuals who have taken, in my opinion, a real leap to move their professional careers into a space where they could, receive a great deal of ridicule. Richard Dolan probably could have, been a professor at a huge university or college in the United States based on his acumen. Stanton Friedman, as an astrophysicist, turning away from the field in the way that he did in pursuing UFO research. It's pretty incredulous, and there aren't many people who choose to do that. So, but I mean, we're obviously fascinated by those who've had direct experiences, and as I mentioned previously, we have a real keen interest in the Canadian UFO stories that just really haven't seen the light of day and aren't a part of the public consciousness in Canada, and it really kind of grinds me a little bit because they're incredibly compelling stories, as well as people who are experiencing things today. So I would leave the answer to that question to be open, because I think, wherever the curiosity takes us.
Yeah, and I think, the series is still expanding in terms of the content that we're covering. So, this particular series, Encounter, was meant to, focus on the ufologists in the field and try to, like Dale's saying, kind of do a bit of a story about them. I feel like, for people who are just getting into this field and who really know nothing about it, the experts are a really good place to start. And, I felt like, these people really needed to be humanized. I think it's really easy for the general public to dismiss, a Stanton Friedman and Richard Dolan as kooks, and, especially when they haven't taken the time to actually listen to what they have to say. So I really thought that, if we could just humanize them a bit by creating that kind of feeling that you're in a one-on-one kind of a chat with this person, and you're going to look them in the eyes and you're going to have a discussion with them. My hope was that that would help to humanize them, and it would help to open up the audience to their point of view. We have more people that we'd like to interview for this series. This is just kind of the beginning for us. As budget allows, we'd like to continue. And yeah, definitely, like Dale said, we're open to exploring, more themes in the future. Personally, for me, I mean, my kind of ultimate kid dream would be to do a series on, UFO encounters in Canada, and actually do reenactment style, little short pieces that are distributed online, that are Canadian stories. Because, the one thing that I've found over the last 20 years working in this field is that, when people pass away, their story goes with them. And, we've done such a bad job in Canada of capturing these stories from people who have them, and documenting them, that, I would love to be able to capture those stories now and kind of put them down on the public record for future. So, that's something that we've definitely been talking about and exploring. But, reenactment style series is expensive. So we're still exploring that as a possible option. But yeah, we're definitely open.
One of the issues that the field of ufology has right now is the collective big name group, if we want to call them that. Stanton is in his 80s, Paul Hellier's in his 90s, Linda Moulton Howe is in her mid-60s to early 70s. A lot of these great ufologists whom we've looked up to the last 20, 30, 40 years are all aging, and they're getting to that point where, let's face it, you hit a certain point, you got one foot in the grave. I hate to put it that way, but that is reality of mankind. And we only have about 4 minutes here before we have to go to break. But I'm curious, who do you think is that new wave replacing them? Because a lot of these people are not having their lineage take over their research.
I know. And that's a frightening thought, actually, because there is such a depth of information there. I mean, in terms of Canada, Dave, you and I today were talking about a few people. To be honest, nobody really has stood out to me in terms of the field from a younger perspective, other than I think it's Jeremy Corbell.
Corbell, yeah.
Corbell in the States, I've thought, is doing some interesting kind of documentary work around the field. But there haven't been many people that I've seen, which is, a little bit frightening.
It is frightening, Dale, because, as we move forward and less people are trusting what is on YouTube or any other type of video channel, there really is a lack of credibility once again, once this first phase of researchers starts to die off. And that's scary for the field.
Yeah, it's scary for the field, but I do think there's a couple of things going on with that. I mean, for me, one of them is people on the sidelines, myself included, looking at it going, well, they've dedicated their lives to this. They've engendered a huge amount of ridicule. That they're not multimillionaires. You have to have a lot of passion for the field, and the same place where they were generated from doesn't exist. And I've kind of thought that, we may enter a bit of a dark ages where we don't have that next generation to carry the torch forward in terms of research in the same way that we're used to. But it may occur in a way that we're not used to. Millennials in the digital age, and there may be a kind of a new approach to the way that research is done. I mentioned previously, just from a software development point of view, that maybe there's a digital army that comes forward to kind of digitize all this data and reinterpret it in a new way, or perform research in a more renegade fashion, like Vice, for example, in terms of journalism, kind of more guerrilla style in that regard. And I do think as well, we could experience kind of a renaissance in terms of recruiting more people into researching it if we were to have another kind of Phoenix style mass sighting. I think we're due for a mass sighting very soon. I'm not Nostradamus, but I kind of feel that they seem to happen every 20, 25 years. I feel that it seems to me that one would happen. And yes, in the age of the smartphone, if you had a mass sighting and, God willing, it happened in the daytime, it would be just absolutely phenomenal. So an event like that could cause a complete regeneration of interest in terms of really diving into the field and getting some new researchers. And then, of course, I think there'll be folks that we won't anticipate will come forward. There'll be the university type individuals who have been researching on the side, and just like John Mack, can kind of take a keen interest and start to go further into their research and start to publicize that. So hopefully we'll get a little bit of a mix of all of that. So while we can't see that new generation right now, hopefully as some of our elders leave those torches, we'll pick them up.
I'm going to get you guys to hold on right there because we do have to go to break. Spaced Out Radio going into hour number 3. Our guests tonight, Roz and Dale Mugford. They've done an incredible series called Encounter Series. No relation to the Encounter Online on the Spaced Out Radio website, our news section. But it's been a lot of fun so far. We'll see where we go in hour number 3 on the mighty SOR coming up right after this, because we're talking UFOs all night long. And if you don't like UFOs, well, you need to see one to experience it. We'll be right back.
We're getting strange on Saturday nights. Hi there, this is Dave Cruz, and each Saturday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, I will take you on a tour of the weird and obtuse on Spaced Out Saturdays, from aliens to Sasquatch and every tinfoil hat in between. We got you covered. Join us at spacedoutradio.com for Spaced Out Saturdays. See you there.
Not ready for bed on Saturday night? Right after Spaced Out Saturdays, hop on over to S4 with Corey Ruiz and me, Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. With S4, there are no limits to what we try and uncover. From government conspiracies to helping clean up the paranormal, no topic is safe on S4. We get to the heart of the matter, of the subjects you want to learn more about. So tune in on S4 starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, only on spacedoutradio.com.
Have you had an experience you can't explain? Would you like someone you can trust to look into it? We have just the place. The SOR Sightlines Report is the place for you to find answers. Whether it's Bigfoot, UFOs, Dogman, ghosts, aliens, or anything strange, the Sightlines Report will get you connected with one of our expert researchers to find out what's going on. All of your personal information is kept 100% confidential. The SOR Sightlines Report, a place for you to find the answers you need. Only at spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there. I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4 Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
This is Eric Markham, news editor for the Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter Online. We have put together a great team of writers and journalists from all over the world to bring you top-quality paranormal stories, from alien encounters to the latest conspiracies. You won't find any of that fake news here. True stories and top-notch reporting as we look to bring these experiences to the mainstream. The Encounter Online, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Do you want to know the truth? Do UFOs exist? Are aliens real? Are the governments hiding the biggest secret in history? We're UFO seekers, and we're on a hunt for the truth. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow along with us as we journey across the United States, visiting UFO hotspots and alien hotspots, trying to document the UFO phenomenon. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, we are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
It's Cosmic Sundays with me, Elizabeth Anglin, in Cosmic Passport. Let me take you down a 3-hour spiritual journey where we will get into everything from ET contact to Psychic Sundays. It's a journey of listening and learning together with some of the best professionals in their fields. You can tune in to Cosmic Passport at spacedoutradio.com every Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back to the third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Good to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, it's the anniversary of the JFK assassination. We'll be joined by Dr. James Fetzer in hour number 1, and in hour number 2 and 3, Brian Snoddy is going to be joining us. So that way we get a full spectrum of what happened at that day in Dealey Plaza in Texas. 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time, everything gets going at spacedoutradio.com. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. Great to have you with us as well. We are also live on KTLK, thefringe.fm, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas, and if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Catoptromancy. Catoptromancy is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets a password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to follow us on social media, try it out on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. You can use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio. If you want to connect live with me during the show as well, you can give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. We're also having a live chat on Facebook in the SOR Space Travelers group. We're on Instagram, Dave Scott, SOR. We have a brand new YouTube channel called Spaced Out Radio. No longer Spaced Out Radio Show. We're moving the archives over. All the new shows are going to be on that new channel as well. So make sure you unsubscribe to the old one, subscribe to the new one. We would appreciate that. And you can listen to us on iHeartRadio in the United States, TalkStream Live. You can tune us in on TuneIn. Download and subscribe to our shows on iTunes. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club for $5 a month. You can also shop at our Spaced Out Radio store. Rock out to some Bumblefoot. Watch great videos from UFO seekers and Contact TV. As well, you can read up on the latest news on the Encounter online in our news section. Everything at spacedoutradio.com. Tonight, we are talking and going the distance with Roz and Dale Mugford. They're a husband and wife UFO team who's done an incredible series called the Encounter Series. We welcome Roz and Dale back. How are you?
Great. Hey, we're good.
Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Excellent. You know what? The one thing that we haven't done yet, guys, is we haven't told our listeners where they can listen and find your videos. So please take the time to explain where these documentary series can be found.
Awesome.
Sure, yeah. EncounterTheSeries.com is the website, and there you can kind of preview the series, see the trailer, look at clips from everyone that we've interviewed, and then there's a link there to connect on Vimeo. And the whole series is available on Vimeo, and it's pretty cheap. Really, it's just to cover the cost of our time in production for the video. We're not looking to make a ton of money off of it, but just hoping to make a little bit of money and then put it towards interviewing more people. The series is kind of not finished. We have some more behind-the-scenes footage and other clips that we'll launch for the series, and of course are going to interview more ufologists as we continue. So that's where you can find it, encountertheseries.com.
Have you guys decided whether or not you're going to approach any Canadian television stations or even American stations in regards to this? Maybe documentary type channels, maybe the CBC up here in Canada?
That's a good question. I mean, generally I've been a bit averse in terms of the broadcast environment just because, I've had a pilot funded by the CBC before. I've kind of done that game, and it's a pretty difficult market. There's not a huge amount of funding in Canada for, a series, especially for a UFO type series. So I think if we were going to do anything with it, we would probably go international with it, and we would likely go to a content market like a MIP or a MIPCOM and, look for international buyers, people who are interested in that side and that market, and then maybe take it from there. But yeah, it's a good question. It's something we haven't really explored yet. I was really excited to try out, the Vimeo On Demand platform because, the Vimeo On Demand platform is kind of the first of its kind in terms of allowing video content creators to really upload their own content and then monetize it through their website. They started that years ago when Vimeo first kind of began as a platform. They had this thing called a tip jar. And what that was you could actually, tip the content creator for their work. And over the years, Vimeo, I sound like I'm doing a plug for Vimeo here, but I kind of am. Vimeo has really started to stand out in terms of the filmmakers who are uploading content to it. It's really become more of a filmmaker-driven platform. So as opposed to like YouTube and that type of thing, which is a bit more just kind of straight-ahead content. So Vimeo, they've also been sponsoring film awards at the Toronto International Film Festival. I believe last year they provided a $30,000 prize for a short film and also offered distribution through Vimeo, through their platform to the winner of this competition that they put on at TIFF. So they're a really cool platform, and I was very excited to give it a go with this series in particular, just because it is kind of bite-sized and episodic, and it really fits the mold well in terms of what Vimeo does. So we wanted to start it out there first and really give it a go and see what happens there, and then maybe explore other options after that.
I think too on Vimeo you've got some really great content that's already existing in the UFO field. I know Jeremy Corbell, he's got his work up on there, and a great UFO documentary, which I recommend to anybody, UFO on Nukes, is available on Vimeo On Demand as well. So we felt that there was a little bit of a home for UFO-related content on Vimeo On Demand, so we thought that Encounter would kind of belong in that genre. So if people were looking for UFO-related material on Vimeo, they're going to find us along with other really great content there.
I got a couple questions on Twitter coming from Andrew in North Vancouver. Andrew listens every night. We've converted him into a full-time fan. So
Andrew.
So thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that. He says, you mentioned that scientists are clamoring to become the ones to discover intelligent life beyond our planet. Do you think maybe it's because they've been given the green light by a deeper element within mainstream to do so?
Well, that's a really interesting question. It could be so. I mean, it would be really hard to unpeel the layers of proof around that. But I do think that, it seems to kind of these things, you put them together and, again, a skeptic would say there's nothing to it. But when you hear things like, Travis Walton saying, these are less of sightings and more like showings. And you're hearing, more scientists in very mainstream scientists talk very casually about discovering life on other planets all of a sudden, when not 5 years ago, they'd laugh you out of the room. So what's changing? And, I think for a lot of scientists, it's just simply that the evidence is telling them that it's starting to become ridiculous to suggest. And, any serious mathematician or probabilistic mathematician will tell you the numbers are just too great. The odds are far too great. It's probability 1. And what that means is if you really look at the numbers, it's absurd to say that the odds aren't next to like 99.9999999 that we're not alone. So I think, when many of the mainstream scientists who are clamoring to make that discovery, they've come across this science, and so they feel much more confident. And I think many of them want to believe, just like Fox Mulder does, that we are not alone. Because I think the idea that we are alone in a vast chasm of space that is infinite in size and somehow managed to cause this little planet to people, and just one planet is a really, really, really sad thought. And I also think that it's not a realistic thought. I think, as we've explored and we can see further in space and we are able to perform equations to determine how many planets there are, how many of those planets are exoplanets that are in the Goldilocks zone, similar to Earth, and we're finding more and more and more of them, that is maybe comforting for some of these scientists who wanted to believe that the odds were very great that we weren't alone. And now they're getting very excited that not only are the odds great that we're not alone, but the odds are great that they might discover that we're not alone and be the one to do so.
Yeah, I think Dale's right. I think the science is really lending itself now to, it's overwhelming now in terms of the probability of life in the universe when you have, NASA coming forward and saying, within the next 20 years we expect to find life. I mean, it's chicken and egg, right? It's like, was it internal forces that started to kind of leak this information and say, okay, now is the time? Or was it the science and this kind of buildup of science that's determined that? I mean, for me, I feel like, the Kepler telescope and, what they've been able to find with Kepler, I feel like has been a real watershed moment. I think, the discovery of exoplanets and the way, like, Stanton Friedman was telling us in our interview with him, he's saying, it's like a butterfly, flapping its wings in front of a headlight, 2 miles away or something, right? Like that's what Kepler is measuring. It's measuring the dimming of the light in front of the star that happens as the planet passes in front of it. That's amazing technology, and that's something that, we've only just been able to measure in like the last 5 years. So, I feel like it's that technology, more so than anything that's really driven kind of this new almost space race, if you will, in terms of countries wanting to be the first country to, find life. I had just pulled up, the Aperture Spherical Telescope, the Eye of Heaven in China, which is the massive radio telescope that they just built, I think, in the last 2 years, the largest telescope on Earth, I believe. So the Chinese are in it now too, and they're like, we just built the biggest telescope. We want to find life. I mean, I feel like every country that has some budget and some money to put into this, they're going all chips down right now, to go down in history as that country that discovered life. I mean, what an amazing achievement that would be. That's the biggest discovery of humankind. So.
And I agree with you that there is something very special about the possibility of, finding human life elsewhere. I think it is really the next stage and the next phase that we have to take on. But this leads to Andrew's next point. He goes, perhaps ritually it's simply time and mainstream scientists are now allowed to seek life seriously, an intelligent life beyond Earth, instead of being ridiculed. Do you think that's apparent right now from what you guys have learned?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's Kepler. It really is Kepler. Kepler found so many planets per star, between 1 and 1.6 planets per star, that the math just became overwhelming. You plug that into the Drake equation, and the numbers are just insane in terms of the possible civilizations in our galaxy alone. Now, the numbers, shift all around with the Drake equation, depending on whether you're pessimistic or you're optimistic. And perhaps there's going to be a new way that we formulate trying to determine how many civilizations might exist in the universe or in our galaxy. But in general, here on Earth, I think Kepler really opened the door for scientists to say, man, we can look, we can see these planets, we can see what types of planets they are, we can see whether they're gaseous, whether they're what the distances are from the stars. So it's providing us with a lot of really good data in terms of determining where the really good candidates are. And then there are different teams looking at all of those candidates and trying to assess what the probability is of those candidates harboring life. But here, this is where I get into, the kind of philosophy around this type of work, because what we're really talking about is, science is comfortable saying that, they would make public a discovery that there are life-bearing planets, and then maybe make public that they think that this planet is harboring some form of life. But they won't make the leap to say it's intelligent life, and they won't make the leap to say that there are civilizations there and that those civilizations are advanced and capable of traveling to our planet, etc. They won't make any of those prognostications. They're talking about, single-celled organisms, or they're talking about just very basic statements. They're not going to make the leap to say we've discovered an alien ancient civilization that is possibly capable of traveling to Earth. So, that's where the comfort zone is for those scientists. They're comfortable exploring the idea of discovering a possible life harboring planet, not necessarily announcing that they found intelligent civilizations. But therein lies the rub with that conversation, because here we are on planet Earth still trying to figure out what intelligence is. And if I was to be, a comedian, I could say, we still haven't found it on our planet. But there are many scientists still debating whether, what is sentience? What makes something self-aware? Can we determine what makes it self-aware? What is consciousness? We don't have answers around those types of questions. So it's very hard for us to determine if we're going to make a statement about life on other planets, what is intelligence, or what would qualify as intelligent in terms of what we discover. So I think is our understanding of what intelligence is or sentience is on planet Earth. I mean, there are many scientists who believe that apes are sentient, that dolphins are sentient, that elephants are sentient. There are biologists who believe that plants are sentient. So, and they've put papers together about the intelligence of plants. So we're still discovering what intelligence is on our planet and trying to define what its characteristics are. And then, of course, from a more philosophical point of view, like what is consciousness and what makes something conscious? Can we detect it in something else, even if it can't communicate to us? So there are all those things we're working through as well scientifically, which muddy the waters about what we discover in terms of life. Or if we discover a possible life-bearing planet, we discover signs of life. How we look for those signs of life, says more about us than those signs of life. We believe carbon-based life forms, would consume oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide, but it may be completely reverse. And there are lots of scientists. Michio Kaku, as a physicist, is one who's very open to the fact that other forms of life may function completely differently from how we function, and the building blocks for that life may be different from what we think are the building blocks for life everywhere. So there's a lot still to be learned in that regard, but I love that there are a lot more scientists who are a lot more open towards discovering life and open towards what they might discover, and have kind of, as Roz mentioned with China, that they're pouring big money into discovery, and that can only mean good things for the field.
I want to get to Tripp's question here. He is asking, do either of you think we will find microbial alien life before human-sized aliens first? Now, personally, I think that's the way, if disclosure happens, that's the way it's going to play out. I mean, there's already talk about the octopus, the jellyfish, and other sea creatures that we just can't find any type of, earthly trait to them. And they're mysteries. So I'm just wondering, do you think science, for the sake of safety of disclosure, will go with microbial alien life versus aliens that are humanoid?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's really interesting. I think, from my perspective, I mean, I feel like microbial is definitely going to be the first discovery, just because of our own measurement tools and what we have at our own disposal, to go out to these exoplanets and, do some, get some samples and test, et cetera. I mean, they recently found, what was it, the moon near Saturn? What do I want to say? Enceladus? Was it Enceladus where they found the hydrogen jets coming out from the moon? And they are now saying that they feel that Enceladus is the next planet that's going to harbor life, that they feel like that's the next big candidate that microbial life could exist on. I feel like that's a great candidate right now. So that's my feeling is it's going to be microbial life first. But, I mean, at this point, to be honest, anything could happen. I don't know, Dale. What do you think?
Well, I think based on the Kepler research, it looks like what they could announce is that a planet exhibits biological patterns that are consistent with life-bearing creatures. So, they would compare they can actually measure, oxygen in the atmosphere. They can determine atmospheric composition and be looking at the characteristics like Earth breathes in and breathes out. Every year there's a cycle of carbon dioxide and oxygen that's consistent with life on the planet, right? All of the trees bloom in the northern hemisphere and, grow leaves and collect carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. And then they give up their leaves in the fall and all this carbon gets released back in and there's this ebb and flow in and out. So they can measure those kinds of things on planets that Kepler is finding. So when they look at those, they might say, we're finding patterns consistent with biological life forms existing on that planet. So that's maybe something that they would announce first before we could actually trek out there and figure out what kind of life it is. If we can get to something a lot closer, then we can send a probe out there, for example, to the planet that Roz mentioned and actually go and get some samples and find that hard evidence of microbial life. But I do think it's far more palatable for the scientific community in general to announce that they've discovered planets that have patterns consistent with life and then hopefully find microbial life. But I do think that there is a possibility, because we are looking at Kepler data and it is so good, that we might come across something that looks like a Dyson sphere or looks like a very advanced civilization and and its characteristics are consistent with technological advancement, and that would shock us. So the question is, would they reveal that information to us? Well, because Kepler's data is accessible to most scientists and researchers around the world, I don't think they'd be able to keep that contained. I think, again, there's so much skepticism in the scientific community that it is even possible that highly advanced technological societies exist in our galaxy. They're still so skeptical. They're just releasing the data to everybody to look at. So there is a possibility that someone will come across really compelling evidence that there's technologically advanced civilizations in our galaxy. And I'd say, based on what we know in general in the UFO community and the evidence about visitation to our planet, that that's also possible.
Well, there's some interesting, even around Tabby's star, right? Like Dale's saying about the Dyson sphere, that still it remains unknown. Every other month there's some new theories around what that could be, Is it rocks? Is it space, debris around the planet? Like, what is it that's actually causing those dips in the light? I think Dale's right. There's definitely the potential for a major discovery. There's also, I feel like lately in the news, there's been a lot of talk about hearing new radio signals. And I'm not sure if it's from the Chinese telescope or where those signals, I haven't been really closely following, but I know that there's been more news lately about strange radio signals, frequencies that have been captured that are piquing scientists' interest. So it's a really amazing time, actually. I feel like there's this almost like this engine turning, and there's so much happening, astronomically that, really anything could happen.
Where do you see ufology going now? What is the next step? Like I said earlier in hour number 2, Grant Cameron believes we need to get back to the experiencers and take all of the puzzle pieces that the experiencers are giving us in order to try and flow with the pieces to see if we can get a clearer picture of what is going on, because the governmental side or the scientific side is really going nowhere right now. So I leave it to you guys, being newbies in the field, where do you see this going in, say, 5 years to 10 years?
Well, I mean, for me, I feel like in 5 to 10 years, we're going to have vastly, more amounts of data and more proof about the existence of life beyond our own planet. I think it's just a massive lead up to that right now. And so, when that does happen, when that discovery is made and it is announced, I mean, that's going to shake everybody. That's the big moment, right? Where we realize that, finally science confirms that we're not alone in the universe. So, I mean, at that point, all bets are off. I mean, I really, I can't even fathom that, in terms of what's going to happen after that moment. But I feel like that's coming. And I feel like that's something, excitingly that we're going to get to witness in our lifetime. If I stay alive that long, hopefully, knock on wood.
I know the feeling.
Yeah. But I mean, that's super exciting because, like I said, coming from, elementary school where there were only X number of planets, and to now where it's like there's a planet for every star. Oh, and by the way, we're going to discover life in the next 10 to 20 years. I mean, at the pace we're going, I feel like it could be a lot sooner than that. So that's where I feel like it's going.
Well, just thinking kind of hypothetically for me, I'm looking at it going, well, I think it's really important. I think what Grant's talking about is definitely very valid. I think we need to be doing as much research as we can. We can get back to basics and collect experience or reports. We need to keep collecting that information, keep researching, and keeping the floodgates open towards making sure that we're doing everything we can to explore the phenomenon and capture every piece of information that we can capture. Because I think there's a possibility for convergence. I mean, just thinking hypothetically, what if, scientists do make a big announcement, NASA gets together and say, we found life. Mm-hmm. What if the day that happens, not shortly thereafter, aliens go, great, now you're not alone. Hi, welcome to the intergalactic community. And it's a big shocker on another level. So it's going to be really important for every researcher who's collected information about the fact that we have been visited, over the last century, 2 centuries, or however long, that they've been coming here. Here's what information we have about what we know about these kinds of creatures. So what if that were to happen? What if there were some kind of, floodgates and kind of, the snowball down the hill where all of a sudden we announce we've discovered life, but then life shows up and goes, yes, great. Okay. You've now reached this certain junction point where you accept that there's life there. It didn't rock your planet. They look at what happens to us and say, okay, maybe they can join the community now. So there's lots of reasons in my mind why it doesn't really matter whether mainstream accepts it or not, or whether, whether science makes that discovery in 5 years, 10 years, 20 or 30. It's important for us to do this research because it's clear in my own personal research that something is happening that is outside of most of our everyday experience, and that, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have had experiences. They've witnessed UFOs. They know people who've seen of UFOs. People have been abducted or had close encounters in one form or another. So those reports are being made around the world. So something's happening for people, and it's important that we collect that information, because I think it will be valuable at some point down the road in some form or shape.
And I can appreciate that thinking, guys. But you have to look at it on another side. Hollywood, over the last 20 years, pretty much since, even 30 years if you go back, pretty much since the movie E.T., has done nothing but denigrate the alien agenda. I mean, mostly every movie that comes out has extraterrestrials in a highly negative and malevolent form. And video games, the exact same way. And there's a lot of people who believe out there, not to put the tinfoil hat on or anything, but there's a lot of people out there in the field of ufology who say this is part of the big game that the government is playing with Hollywood, with video game creators, to keep that negativity in people's minds about extraterrestrial contact.
I mean, I think it's just a human thing, and I think it's a kind of it's a part of our reptilian brain, to kind of be afraid of what we don't know, and to feel threatened by some kind of invader or outside force. But I can tell you, in my own opinion, if an intergalactic alien species is capable of getting here, then they're capable of defending themselves from whatever puny human boring weapons we have. And so they could simply stand there. Puny. They could sit there in the atmosphere with a massive shield on and protect themselves from everything we throw at it, still saying, "Hey, we're here. We'd like to be friendly. We'd like to meet you." And it would blow holes in everything that Hollywood has tried to do.
Yeah, and Dale and
for the last 50 years.
Dale and I have had this conversation, a number of times, and I feel personally, I feel that violence is a very human characteristic, and I feel like it's a very base characteristic. I feel like we are violent as a species because we come from monkeys, and that's our most base nature, is to beat each other. That's just part of our biology. I feel like any alien civilization that has gotten to the point where they can travel through space and time to arrive here to observe is going to be so far beyond violence. Like, violence is not even going to factor into how they even think. It's not even going to be it's not even going to be a part of their culture, is how I feel. Like, to have achieved that level of technology where you can travel that distance, you have to be more advanced and more elevated in your thinking as a species. Like, we can't even come together, as a species to get, most things done on the day-to-day, right? So, I think the level of thinking that's required to get to that point is so much higher than, what we currently have in terms of our human brains, that for me personally, I'm not worried about a violent alien civilization. I think that they're going to be way more advanced than that.
Mm-hmm. Let's get to Andrew's question here. He says, in 2014, Pope Francis stated the Catholic Church would baptize Martians. Do you think the Catholic Church really doesn't lie about doesn't really lie about baptism? What do you think this says about the Catholic Church opening up that there are UFOs and they are willing to bring them to the face of Christ?
Wow. Well, I've heard for a long time, in the last number of years, that the Catholic Church is actually preparing internally for the announcement of life outside of Earth. And that this is one of the ways that they are starting to get their, followers prepared and ready, because, the reality is, for a religion like Catholicism, to discover that there's life outside of planet Earth is going to completely throw their religion up in the air in terms of everything that people believe, everything that, people have read in the scriptures and in the Bible and how the earth was created and et cetera, et cetera. So, I've heard for a long time that they are actively preparing, because of all the scientific data now and all of the, the murmurings about life, discovery of life, that they're actively preparing and getting ready for that so that, devout Catholics don't have a complete meltdown on that day when life is discovered.
I mean, from my perspective, if you get to the root of the teachings in most of the world's religions, Jesus didn't say aliens don't exist. He didn't really have any specific teachings that I know of that say humans are the only ones that exist in the entire universe. And certainly Buddha did not say anything to that. In fact, Buddha had said the opposite. And most Buddhist teachers actually talk about there being multiple worlds and sentient beings all throughout the universe. So I actually think that it's kind of been the path of how the religions have evolved and the power structures have evolved, even from the Roman times around, in particular Christianity and Catholicism, that have kind of leaned the religion towards the idea that you think about Giordano Bruno and discovering that the Earth was not the center of our universe. It's not even the center of our own galaxy. It's not even the center of our own solar system, right? We're going around the sun, and that was buried for 200 years by the church because it was heresy. So they've kind of walked down a road of a number of different beliefs about how the universe worked and our place in it that I don't think are necessarily tied to the root teachings themselves. So I kind of give them a pass in that regard, and that the teachings themselves didn't really say that that we're the only ones and we're the most important, etc. So whether that's misinterpretation or the way that the church moved, we don't have time to cover all of that. But I do think that what I'm trying to say in the kind of summary of it is, religions can still exist even if aliens exist, and spiritual beliefs, should probably continue. If anything, they might expand in a universe where we are not alone and we have brothers and sisters that extend beyond our planet.
Mm-hmm. Question coming from the chat room from John, who is asking, do you believe then that we humans are the first or original creation on this earth?
Oh, that's kind of a religious question. And, if I'm to think from a scientific point of view, would say, no, we're not. But I think the jury's out on whatever was first here. And you mentioned, Dave, about octopus. It's a crazy biological entity on this planet that's kind of evolved separately from everything else. And the jury's kind of out on the octopus for how it evolved.
How it actually arrived here as well. Yeah.
So, when we're talking about the origin of life, again, are we, when we made the leap from monkeys, there are some people who believe there was alien interference in how we evolved from apes. There's lots of theories and ideas. Mainstream science doesn't tend to accept most of those theories, but again, it doesn't have all the answers as well. So, I'm less interested in the origins of life on Earth and more interested in finding out whether we're alone.
Yeah, I definitely am a believer in the origin of species and Darwin and life began as a single-celled organism on Earth and, kind of grew from there. I definitely fall under that camp. But, I do find things like the octopus extremely interesting. And, in terms of wondering how they got here and how they arrived on the planet. And, this whole thing about how they're a complete different branch of our, biological tree and how they actually don't fit with anybody else and any other stream.
They have 8 brains. 8 brains, Dave.
I find that absolutely fascinating. So, I think we still have a lot to learn about how life evolved on Earth for sure. Do I think we were the first thing here? No. But do I think we know everything? No. So I'm definitely open to new interpretations of Darwin's theory, that's for sure.
Have you guys ever thought about the possibility of what you would do if you had that extraterrestrial encounter?
Yeah, we have actually. We've talked about this a number of times. I mean, I think, for Dale and I, we're kind of always watching the skies and we're always looking out. And I mean, I've seen some things, I was driving across the northern part of the U.S. Actually, this is this is probably like 7 years ago now. I was driving out to BC, actually, from Ontario. And I was taking the United States route because it's faster. So I was cutting across the top of Montana, and, I didn't know it then, but there's a ton of sightings in and around northern Montana because there's that Air Force base there. And as I was driving, it was pitch black, it was the middle of the night, and this like extremely bright light, just like the only way I can describe it is it just streaked across the sky, right over top of my truck as I was driving on the highway. It was pitch black. It was like, I was driving through the night, right? Because going from Ontario to BC, it's like a long drive. So it's driving through the night. And I remember in that moment just feeling like, wow, I don't know what that was, but that was something that I've never seen before. And I just witnessed something that, was it a comet? Was it a ship? I don't know what it was, but it was bright and it streaked right across, the top of my truck. So, I mean, we've definitely kind of seen things that we haven't been able to pin down in terms of what they were. But I think both of us would love to one day actually see something in the sky that is legitimately, moving in a way that is indicative of something not from here. I think we're always looking at the skies, searching for that. We don't, we live in Hamilton, so we don't get a lot of darkness there. So it's hard for us to watch the skies in Hamilton. But when we come out to Prince Edward County, we, get a bit of night sky out here, which is really nice. So, I've been dying to get a telescope and, look a little more. So, I mean, yeah, I'm hoping that one day we get that experience. Fingers crossed.
From my side, if I just kind of talk instead of about a craft sighting or something like that, if it was actually to I like to joke with Roz about what would I say to an extraterrestrial creature if I had a chance to instead of encounter the series where we're interviewing ufologists, I actually get to have an encounter with an alien, actually get to ask some questions. I think the thing that I've struggled with is what would I ask? Or if it was only one question and I could ask one question, what would I ask? It's a really difficult question for me. But I kind of circle around the idea of asking if they struggled. And hopefully hearing that, yes, they struggled quite a bit too in their evolution. And I think that would give me some hope and optimism that maybe there would be some kind of commiseration around it's totally normal as a species or whatever. There's nothing wrong about humanity. And it would kind of really, I think, give me a real sense of peace around some of the real earthly struggles we deal with all the time and the suffering that we see. And certainly in our information age, how we're exposed to just so much crap and it can really get us down. So I think, if I was to just hear from somebody who is, didn't live here and live far, far away, that, it's a universal struggle, evolution or growing as a species or trying to work past your troubles. That would be the question that I would ask and hope to hear an answer yes, we struggled too, Maybe I'd hear something from them yeah, but we didn't struggle as hard as you guys. I mean, you guys really suck.
You had Trump.
But, yeah. I don't know why it took you so long, but yeah, I think, and I'd be interested to hear what it's a good question for anyone is what would you say, what question would you ask if you could ask one? And it almost gets religious a little bit because I'm assuming that they have answers that we don't have because they have technology we don't have and they have abilities we don't have. So I would tend to look up to them, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And, I can honestly tell you that the first time it happens to you, because not only has it happened to me, but it's happened to a lot of people that I've known, because I ask that question quite a bit, be prepared to swear a lot when it happens. Okay? Be prepared. You know, if you want to get rich quick, have your swear jar ready. You'll have a nice vacation after it happens. The reason why is, I can tell you this. You know, you get all these people out there, and everybody is brave on a computer, or everybody is brave when they're talking about the subject. But until it happens to you, I can tell you this. You will forget about your camera. You will forget about any recording device or filming device. And your mind will not allow you to comprehend what your eyes are seeing.
Yes.
It reminds me of that story of the Native Americans, whether it's true or not, where when Columbus's ships were arriving in the 1400s there, that they couldn't see the ships. And it was only the shaman that could see the ships, because it was so far outside of their realm of daily life, of their existence on planet Earth, that they actually couldn't see the ships, and it was only the shaman that could see the ships. And I'm sure it's kind of folklore, but it really paints exactly what you're saying, Dave, that it's so profoundly outside of your reality that it just shatters everything instantly.
Oh, absolutely it does. And you don't know how to react. So I like to ask people, like if I'm interviewed on other shows, and I get that question, and people are like, "Oh man, why didn't you take a picture of the alien that you saw in the forest?" And I explain to them, explain to me how you would react, and then let's talk reality. Because there is a reality behind these types of sightings and experiences, especially if you haven't had them before. So if it does happen to you, and now that you go down the rabbit hole, there's a better chance that it actually will. How would you prepare yourself? Do you guys prepare yourself, or is it just kind of like, well, if it happens, it happens?
Yeah, I think it's more along those lines. I mean, I totally agree with you in terms of like, you know, that people forget about their cameras and, you know, because you're just so in the moment, you're so absorbed by what you're seeing and also you don't want to take your eyes off of it, I would imagine, right? So you don't want to actually stop looking at it to grab your camera, to pull your camera out, because you might miss something. So, you know, I think that makes total sense that, you know, you would just completely forget about your recording device and just be absolutely awestruck. I mean, I think that, you know, that would likely be my reaction. I mean, working in video production, maybe I would be a little more quick to grab a camera. I would hope so. But yeah, I think that we're definitely in the, you know, if it happens camp. We're definitely not planning for the day, but I think we're hopeful.
For me, after years of research, I would hope I'm a little bit more prepared after, you know. So,
and you know what? I don't blame your reaction. I guess what I'm trying to say here is, me as a journalist, the same way as you guys, I thought I was ready. I literally thought I was ready. But you have to realize our minds are trained, much like you just said about the First Nations. When they first saw Columbus's ships coming in, they couldn't see them. Our minds go back to the standard default button where it's like, this isn't supposed to exist. Then you start having this argument between your brain and your eyes that absolutely tunes everything out. I've had that happen to me 3 times. When I saw the ship, when I saw the alien ship on the ground, when I met my first extraterrestrial, and the third time was before that happened, when I had an encounter with 2 Sasquatch. Each time I had my phone on me. Each time I didn't even think of pulling out my phone. Just didn't even think. I just had to take in that experience and analyze it into my brain. And so the advice that I would give you is, don't be too, if it does happen to you, don't be too upset if you do forget your camera.
For sure. For sure. I think it's just surrender. You're going to be surrendered. And I would imagine that from some of the stories that, I've come across that, I may not even have a choice. It could be that my mind is being controlled, or that, I'm not really in full faculty in some manner or form, whether it's individuals who have been abducted and have no memory or don't feel that they're present at all and have missing time and only put things back together years later in hypnosis. So who can't even recall that they had this event. So I think if you have this event, Dave, as you're saying, for your own accounts, and you actually can recall it, I mean, that's the gift there for you, that you actually know that this happened to you, whereas some people don't ever know that it happened to them and yet live a life and have crazy experiences and can't put everything together. I mean, we only hear about the people who kind of come forward with it. Some people don't ever make sense of what they feel was an abduction.
Well, and I feel like that's really kind of one of the motivating parts of the I Know What I Saw documentary, with James Fox, which is, there's an amazing interview that he does with a farmer who's out in his field. Yeah, is his name Billy? Yeah. And, he's standing there, and James Fox is just asking him, like, just describe what you saw, right? As around the Phoenix Lights. And he was saying, he saw this giant craft, like, float overhead, and it was silent. He had never seen anything like it.
No rivets, no seams.
No rivets, no seams, no sound. Yeah. He was completely awestruck. And
you can tell he goes back to that moment in that interview. He's kind of starts to get entranced, and he's just he's almost tremoring. And this is a big rural farmer dude.
Yeah, farm guy.
Who just seems to crumble to pieces.
Yeah, and he's just saying to James Fox, he's like, I just want to know what it was. I just want to know what it was. I just want somebody to tell me what it was. Like, he's so shaken, and it's such a good interview because, yes, you see the side of this person, and this is what's so compelling about, people's accounts who have seen something, is that they are so awestruck by what they saw, and that it comes clearly through in their interviews. And like almost every single one of the interviews in that documentary, and I Know What I Saw, is just so compelling. Everybody who's interviewed in it, including the governor of Arizona, who also saw that ship and denied it, and then came out years later and admitted that he had seen it.
Good old Fife Symington.
Right? And, they are all completely gobsmacked. You can tell there's like a look in their eyes. And for me, like, having been interviewing people my entire career at this point, I feel like I'm a pretty good judge of character, and I can tell, when someone is being real for sure on camera. I can tell when someone's being real on camera, especially if it's like a documentary style interview where, this person's not a professional, right? They're not someone who's trained to be on camera. They're just being interviewed. And I can tell when those people are being truthful, because there's nothing harder than trying to lie on camera, when you haven't been on camera before, like, and you're just trying to come across on camera, you're trying to get your thoughts out. So I can really tell that these people are being completely straightforward and honest, and they all have that same look in their eye. Like, I saw something that I could not explain, and I have been forever changed. It's so compelling, the interviews in that piece. So yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. I think, anyone who's had an experience, everyone has that same look in their eye.
Andrew on Twitter is asking, how do your friends and family react to your research?
Or don't.
Yeah. Generally supportive. I mean, I think I kind of know, who's already open-minded towards it and who's not. And I don't really feel we get treated any differently for our kind of intrigue into the subject. I think that, good friends and good family should, love you and support you no matter what. And I think, we generally have that.
That's true. Yeah, that's really true.
You're very lucky then. And I want to sneak in. We only got about 2 minutes left. Do you think that as you go down this rabbit hole with UFOs anymore, do you think you'll ever try to find that missing link that seems to take place between the paranormal and ufology?
What do you mean by that exactly? What link?
A lot of people will believe that there is some sort of factor that, maybe they start off with paranormal experiences and then it leads to ufology, or maybe they have a cryptid experience that leads to extraterrestrials. So there's a lot in this field that actually believe that the two are tied together. And if you haven't gone there, that's fine. That's fine. But I'm telling you, it's there.
Yeah. Well, the book that got me super excited about this when I was a kid was Mysteries of the Unexplained. It was a Reader's Digest compendium. And it had stories that span, like I mentioned to you earlier, Dave, every facet of the paranormal. So everything from, Bigfoot to UFOs to ghosts to demons to, frogs falling from the sky. I mean, you name it. It had every type of supernatural activity in there. And I was fascinated by all of it as a kid. So, I can never say never.
I'm going to have to cut you guys off there. Once again, Dale, let my audience know where they can find the videos on Vimeo.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. EncounterTheSeries.com is the website, and there's a link through to the Vimeo website there where you can have a look. You can buy the videos individually or all together, and we're at Encounter Series on Twitter.
Thank you guys so much. You hold on. I'm going to wrap this thing up. In the background, you hear Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Art of Anarchy and Sons of Apollo, our resident guitar god, rocking us out of every show with Little Brother Is Watching. We appreciate Mr. Bumblefoot for making us sound so rockin' fresh every single night. Tomorrow night on the program, we get into the JFK assassination. Yes, we're going there. It is the anniversary of what happened at Dealey Plaza. First hour, Dr. James Fetzer, the king of conspiracy. Hours 2 and 3, Seattle researcher Brian Snoddy will join us. It's going to be a great show indeed. We get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern time. I want to say thanks to my great team, Eric Markham, Amy Martin, Michael W. Hall, Catherine James, Tim Doyle, Jolene Lammers, Olaf Phillips, and so many more who helped bring this together. And let's not forget the key ingredient to it all, the mouth of the North, Mr. Bob Davis, who does our introductions. He's got the great dulcet tones of radio, makes us sound good every single night. But most of all, I thank you, the listeners, those of you sitting at home, in your cars, wherever you may be, and especially to those who take part in the chat rooms every single night, getting your questions in there, making things happen on a nightly basis. You did awesome again. Thank you for sharing our shows, following us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, following us on Instagram at Dave Scott SOR, because together, my friends, we own the night. I will talk to you in 21 hours from now. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Have a good one. Good night.